Well, Charles, little technical snafu there in the beginning. It used to be the same thing every week. How are you, Charles? Wonderful to have you back. You were traveling, giving a speech to the numerous billionaires that you happen to socialize with when you are doing that sort of thing. I'm delighted that we've got with us again today Fabien Chalandon. How are you, Fabien? Comment ça va?
Very well, thank you.
Good to see you.
I have to say to you, I think, good evening, because for me it's 7 a.m. Japanese time, Monday morning. So
exactly.
Timing is very relative.
You may want to relax, sit back a bit. There you go.
That's better, yeah.
Much better, much better, much better.
Okay.
So today we have prepared a lot of information about the Pinko Panthers. Where does that term come from, Charles? Pinko.
Pinko is slang for a communist.
Well, I know, but what's the etymology of that?
I would not know. I just know it fits pretty well. And before we get too deeply into this, I think, Fabien, wouldn't you agree this art department has once again outdone itself? I mean, we should spend a little time explaining, navigating for our viewers through this scene, because I mean, it's really something else.
Well, thank you. We can do that. The idea originally came about, of course, because our guest hails from France. And so the idea of a send-up of the famous Inspector Clouseau series was the brainchild of Mr. Ortel, of course. And we've got some of our conspirators here. We're going to focus on the Sarkozys, and of course, what's Sarkozy's first name? Is it Francois?
Nicolas
Sarkozy.
Nicolas.
And his wife, Carla Bruni, the former model. And, of course, Bill would never pass up an opportunity to get in bed with a model. We've got Hillary drinking a toast with Sarkozy, undoubtedly over the Unitaid situation they put together, where all the Ranbaxy drugs and all the taxing on the plane tickets. Here we've got Robert Mueller looking uncomfortable, undoubtedly due to the uranium stashed someplace secretive. And then we've got our two inspectors looking on as all these faulty Ranbaxy pharmaceutical products are seen there.
Threatening to come tumbling down on the whole scene.
Exactly.
So very well done.
Thank you, Charles. I try to keep it interesting for everyone. We've got over 50,000 subscribers now on Crowdsource The Truth.
Congratulations.
Thank you. 50,400, something like that. So we're barreling towards 100,000.
You might explain to the viewers the significance of that. You were telling me earlier that a very small percentage of YouTube channels gets even close to this level, and you've managed to do it, I think, in far less than a year.
Well, King James shared that with me. King James had said that I think the number that he gave me was something like 4% or 5%. Wow. Of all YouTube channels reach 50,000 subscribers or more. I don't have the time frame, but certainly I started this channel a while ago and kind of did nothing with it. And then in October 2016, I put up the first video, but it wasn't really until April or May of 2017 that I started regular broadcasts. And so, yeah, it's been pretty much less than a year that we've grown it to 50,000 subscribers, and that's really interesting. Of course, we really haven't had a commensurate type of growth in terms of the Patreon subscribers and the sponsors of the channel, but that's all right. I think that's going to come as we start to get to 100,000, 500,000, a million, and then we'll see the deep state shenanigans go really crazy.
Well, so I was going to say, today, Fabien, thanks so much for taking time away from your family, especially so early in the morning on a Monday, your time. And what we're going to do, if it's okay, the structure of the presentation, I'm going to take the audience through the first 4 slides very quickly, Fabien, and then we're going to go to your presentation and let you take take us through your presentation. We'll have some back and forth on that. And then I'll finish it up with one slide at the very end. But we want to give the bulk of the time to you. We're following a standard formats so that the people become accustomed to seeing. So if you will, I'll just take you through it and then we'll jump into your presentation. So the idea here is that we've looked back over the many presentations we've done. And when the presentations fall more on the academic side, the audience tends to be less interested. But when it becomes apparent that it looks as if the government authorities are now closing in and something real finally will happen, then the audience gets a lot more interested. And I want to start by saying and thanking the hosts, we won't use their names, who had me down in Florida at a wonderful club, I can reveal the name of it, called the Pine Tree Club near Palm Beach in Florida. And this was a great audience. They had done a lot of studying. And the number one, in the Q&A session, the number one questions all seem to revolve around, well, does this even matter? Is anything ever going to come of it? And so I took them through the fact that, yes, it matters a great deal. And indeed, this year, in 2018, as we've gotten into Fabien's show and Michael Smith's show and Harmon's show, and as John Solomon and others have been on here explaining just how serious this really is, people are beginning to stand up and take notice. In fact, down in Florida, somebody said, if this actually happens, that the Clintons get sent onto the ash, and I said ash with an H, heap of history, and maybe even get heavily penalized and perhaps even among their number, the trustees, executives, professional advisors, the big donors, if some of them have to pay gigantic fines or even go to prison, this will be a very large story. And I think what we're going to do here today is report on the progress that is going on, has been going on, while everyone else was blabbering on fake news television. Certain people, Fabien and others, have been very successful, interesting big governments, big donors to get to the bottom of what really happened and then hold people accountable. So what we're going to do, if we go to the second page, and here I'll just fly through the second page, but nonetheless, we have new viewers every week, and you need to understand, particularly you new viewers, that everything we're doing here is our opinion expressed under our First Amendment rights in this country and supported by facts and links. And in this presentation is quite lengthy and quite detailed. There are a lot of links out there. We are not going to try to go through every one of them, but in particular, congratulating Fabien on his work. His is extremely specific. It stands alone. It will be, it's the kind of presentation, we'll have it linked on this video or linked to this video so you can just download it for free, read it at your leisure, especially those of you who've been following our other presentations and know and have some background and everything we've been telling you. Fabien's work puts it all together, I believe, tailored to the mind of a French prosecutor, a French government official, a European government official, and I commend you, Fabien, on that work. It's fantastic.
Charles, sorry to interrupt, but your statements about the First Amendment have caused me to remember something rather important. Just this week, we have officially overcome the fraudulent strike that we received from an Austrian law firm against the video with Hector Carmona exploring allegations of animal abuse. They had basically said that we were violating their client's copyright by showing the logo of the Spanish riding school in Vienna, who in this video, Hector, the equestrian expert, has shown evidence that they're involved in animal abuse. And rather than refute that evidence, they just put in a faulty copyright strike that resulted in us losing our live streaming capability for 2 weeks. And I've been through the legal process with YouTube, and they've determined that I was correct. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act allows us, through fair use, to talk about and report on these types of things within the context of the First Amendment.
Very good.
Yeah, so we overcame that. That was quite good.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Congratulations to the Constitution.
Yeah. So if we could jump back in,
Yes.
that's all right. And then move on to the third page.
Yes.
Here, a lot actually has happened, and I'll tell you which links, Jason, to pull up. You
Sure.
don't have to pull them all. Fabien, you probably may have been asleep when this was happening, but President Trump went out to a place, Moon Township, next to Pittsburgh, where there's a special congressional race coming up. And for an hour and 20 minutes or so, starting at 7 p.m. yesterday, he was, as they say in this country, he was on fire. I mean, he was just incredible. It seemed to me, maybe there were teleprompters, I couldn't see them, but he just covered every single topic. He was hysterical. He made fun of, he got up there and he said, and I won't try to imitate him, but he got up there and he said, you know, a lot of people were saying I couldn't be presidential. And then he faked, you know, being a stiff presidential person and shuffling around like a zombie and this and that. Who wants to listen to that stuff? You know, it was what part serious political speech and part hysterical stand-up comedy. I mean, it's really something else. And it kind of makes you want to see more and more of it as opposed to anything else. So he was really good. But on a more serious note, especially with North Korea, I mean, this idea that we allowed, and it's not simply Bill Clinton's fault, it's also H.W. Bush with the predecessor, and then Bill Clinton, and then W. Bush, and then Obama.
Madeleine Albright.
Madeleine Not So Bright, and, you know, all of these different people, you know, would talk about fixing it. We sent over, who was the one who sent over Dennis Rodman? Was that Obama or was that?
No, Dennis Rodman went on his own accord. I think he was invited by Kim because he's a huge basketball fan. I actually saw a documentary about Kim Jong-un growing up. He went to school in Vienna at this very fancy school, and the teacher, the Swiss guy, was saying that he was really good at basketball and really liked basketball. So I think Kim, as I understand it, reached out to Dennis Rodman and was like, hey, I'm a fan.
Yeah, but I think that kind of visit would have been, I mean, Rodman, I would doubt, would have gone over to North Korea without, no, I'm pretty sure he would have had to tell somebody in the United States that he was going over there. But nonetheless, the point is that you know, here's Donald Trump taking very controversial positions on North Korea, having the entire mainstream media in this country and in the Western world and in Japan and elsewhere say he's running the risk of nuclear war, it's irresponsible, and this and that. And wait a minute, now the guy may have, and we'll see what really happens, but Kim Jong-un may have agreed to stop nuclear testing already, to give up his nuclear arsenal in exchange for nothing that we know of yet. And
how could he possibly agree to that?
Well, I think it makes sense. If you look and you say, I've got this stick over here, which is a very large stick, and I will use it because North Korea is very far away from the United States of America. And, and if the Fukushima nuclear stuff didn't really hurt us, then that's a nice test case to say that, you know, whatever we do in North Korea is not really going to hurt the mainland U.S. that much. And on the other hand, I've got this carrot, which is they have tremendous stores apparently in North Korea of minerals that they cannot mine. The valuable minerals, some say are worth in the trillions of dollars. So you put those two things together and you say, look, I mean, we've been technically, we signed an armistice with you in the 50s. We've been at war for 60 plus years, or, you know, a hot peace or cold peace or whatever we want to say. Let's get this behind us. You know, look what we did for Germany. Look what we did for Japan. Why are you doing this? Don't you get tired of wearing those crazy uniforms?
Can't they just make Samsung TVs and Hyundais over there, and North Korea will suddenly be a booming economy?
Well, some say that's what they're already doing. You know, they are providing cheap labor for the Chinese, you know, slave labor for the Chinese and other countries.
Well, but Samsung and Hyundai are Korean companies. I mean, South Korea is so unbelievably prosperous for a country that's essentially the size of like New Jersey or something like that. Yeah. It just seems if they could integrate the two, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem like Kim would want to give up his nukes, but if they put him in a mansion and agree not to kill him, who knows what'll happen. If Trump can do this, it really would be an astounding achievement.
And it's not like that's the only thing he's trying to do. I mean, he's not a one-trick pony. He's quite prepared to wade in, use every single day of his first term, and if he gets a second term, to try to fix things, which is remarkable, especially given all the heat he's taken from the media. I mean, you look at, I think he has in the media something like 7% of the media supports him and 93% doesn't. And even so, his poll numbers are approaching par. I mean, 50-50. Imagine if the press decided, you know what, we've had enough of this. Let's give the guy some credit.
I don't know. I mean, Obama was super popular when he started, and by the time he left, I think a lot of people realized there was no change. It was exactly the same. So maybe Trump comes in, half the people hate him, maybe he does a great job and leaves, and everybody will think he was great.
Well, let's hope.
Let's see.
So we don't have to pull this up, but there have been, especially because the one, this is popping up here, the CNN thing.
Sorry.
Yeah. We won't pull up CNN links. We have a moratorium on doing that until they change their editorial staff and their CEO and other people. But you can count on CNN right away to have a story saying that there was nothing, that the Uranium One person had testified before Congress, and the Democrats in Congress on the committee leaked out that there was nothing tying his testimony to Hillary Clinton. There's nothing Berger, et cetera, et cetera.
Isn't that completely wrong?
It is absolutely wrong. It is absolutely wrong. And I would like, if you can, to pull up the Sarah Carter link. Next. Yeah. Sarah Carter is a fantastic investigative journalist. She does a lot of work on her own. She works also with John Solomon. And Sarah got this story out, which is in part an interview with Uranium One informant Victoria Tensing, who was Joe DeGeneva's wife, pushing back and saying, look, the stories, all these stories that came out saying there was nothing to it, were all sourced by Democrats only. Nobody went back to Victoria Tensing to say, what do you think? It was just pure propaganda, but the way in which the stories came out was remarkable last week. It was just a flurry of them, all almost with the same headline, saying there's nothing there, forget about it, etc. These stories, the pre-bunking stories, will prove, I think, to be very embarrassing as soon as possibly this coming week. So if we go back into the old slides, we have a very interesting thing playing out. If you can hit, Jason, the Irish Times link, the next one down. Not that one, this one. And Fabien, you sent me something about this incident in Russia where a Russian and his daughter apparently have been hit by a nerve agent attack, and others have been hit as well, and they're trying to get to the bottom of what really happened with all this. I think in thinking through the narrative of relations between the United States and Russia, and for that matter between the United States and France, the United States and the UK, we have to remember that unfortunately in our countries there are good people and bad people. It is not as simple to say that we have a problem or strained Russian relations, we have issues over this alleged Russian collusion, because the Russian state is responsible for A, B, or C, or the American president is responsible for A, B, or C. Because I think what we're seeing is we have deep state actors, certainly in this country, likely in other countries, and we have different factions in all these countries. And there's been a long-standing, first there was a Cold War forever between the United States and the former Soviet Union. And then in the undoing of the Soviet Union, there have been various strands, both, Americans and international people, Mark Rich, for example, who allegedly looted the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, in league with some Democrats and some Republicans. And so to get to the bottom of what really actually is going on here is going to be a job far bigger than the process that Robert Mueller is going through and that the media is playing along with on MSNBC and CNN, saying it's purely a case of Donald Trump colluded with Vladimir Putin's people to win the election. I mean, it's far deeper than that, and we really need to get to the bottom of it.
I just don't understand how people are still believing that. How long can a lie go on without evidence and have people still believe it?
Yeah, I mean, in Oakland, California, and Greenwich Village for a long time, in Chicago for quite a long time. I mean, this story here, this quadrant story, is something worth reading. an Australian person sent it to me, I think via you, Jason, and we won't go through it all. This is an amalgam of what Michael Smith had written and others had written about the way in which the Australian government gave money to the Clinton Foundation, and then the Australian government gave money to former leaders in the Australian government who set up this global, whatever it is, something fund for education. And it's a long, involved tale, but the basic way in which it works is there seems to be a community of these corrupt leaders who they get to the end of their terms, they need to do something new, and they've seen the model of the Clinton Foundation. You know, that the Clinton Foundation, a foundation led by a dynastic political family, is a foundation that will get a lot of money, and if it's not monitored properly, or if the monitoring system is gamed, then it's a perfect vehicle, slush fund, for self-enrichment and for political advancement. And that's what that story is all about. Worth your reading very closely. Then we have I like bringing this up, I could do 5 a week, but I've just picked this one here from the Sundance at the Conservative Treehouse. And what we're starting to see, that the collusion, the real collusion that's going on here, it's not Trump campaign with the Russians. It would appear to be internal, I would argue, corruption, conspiracy, not simply collusion, wherein the Obama administration and allies in the Clinton camp may have been very much involved, rigging the Democratic primaries and then attempting to rig the general election, and then after they lost, trying to do their level best to get Trump impeached.
Yeah.
And we need to really get through to the bottom of this. For too long, organs of state in the deep state, and then the deep media and the deep academia or light academia or whatever, have been conspiring to make it very difficult for the American public to understand just how corrupt this process seems to have become. You know, when I look back to the history that we've shared with people on this show, that by July 10th, 2015, we know an investigation, it might have been a gamed investigation, but the FBI was had to open an investigation into mishandling of classified information by Hillary Clinton, and they did so on July 10th, 2015. I think we're coming to understand that investigation was basically impeded almost from the get-go, certainly by McCabe, likely by Peter Strzok and others in this conspiracy. And it's not going to be enough to just say, well, they were retired, they paid a fine or whatever, let's not go into it, Hillary Clinton lost, we don't need to do any of this. No, we do need to get to the bottom of it. And that's another great article.
Did we speak on Wednesday, Charles, about stupid Eric Holder saying that Mueller's going to indict Trump for obstruction of justice?
Yeah.
But isn't that like no chance in hell going to stick, because firing Comey was totally justified because he failed to conduct a proper investigation as the director of the FBI?
Well, again, we talked, I think, recently that Eric Holder is a very valuable human being because he's mostly always wrong. So when you hear him say something, it's really useful to let him open his mouth.
Do the opposite.
Especially if it's in the investment world. I mean, you can make a lot of money off him. We don't necessarily need to pull up this YouTube link, because I think when you do that, it'll start talking. But this is a link to a Kevin Shipp video.
Oh, no, I've got the volume down.
All right, so this is Kevin Shipp.
He's great.
On with Greg Hunter. And I've been on with Greg. Good on you, Greg. He's a great guy.
He's got 139 subs.
Huh?
139,000 subs.
Oh, I see. Yeah. And he's a former television personality, I think, for CNN. But anyway, you know this guy, Kevin Shipp. I think you've had him on, and he is making a point in this recent broadcast that the Clinton Foundation stands at the center, in Shipp's view, of this gigantic conspiracy, which is something, of course, I agree with.
Yeah, Kevin's been talking to me quite a bit lately about the shows we've been doing with Harmon Wilfred. I think he's very interested in that. Everybody's very interested in that, because for the most part, I don't think people have known about or heard about Harmon Wilfred before we first brought him on to Sunday with Charles, and now subsequently we've got America's First Refugee, which is a new show on Monday nights at 7, coming up tomorrow. But a lot of people are very interested in what's going on with Harmon Wilfred, including, of all people, Kim.com.
Very good.
Very magnanimous guy.
Good. Well, so we then have, let's just see, this last one is embarrassing. This is, I didn't want to put the failing New York Times up, but this is a story talking about the story in the failing New York Times by
sort
Maggie
of a
Haberman.
meta story.
And exactly. Making this big hash about how Trump is supposedly talking with Clinton impeachment lawyer, and making it seem as the fact that if he were talking, that would signal weakness. But when I look at this story, I see typos in it. I see,
Really?
Yeah. It says about you.
This is Michael Schmidt. I wonder if they're trying to steal the thunder from the actual Michael Smith.
There you go. But anyway, so what I want to do here, Fabien, we'll do one more slide and we'll jump into yours. The next one, Jason, this is really important, and it's going to take a few minutes to do this, but we're going to be talking with Fabien about international problems that the Clinton Foundation has. But what the international people, the government of France, the governments of the UK and Australia may not understand is that in the United States, a charity must comply not only with federal law, but with state laws. And the state laws tend to be very, very strict depending on which state we're talking about. So I'm just going to talk here about problems the Clintons have in 4 states out of the 50, just 4. I could go on, and we don't have enough days in the week to go through all the. All right, so we'll just pick 4, okay? So we'll start with Massachusetts. And if you hit the first link there, okay, this is just, if we scroll down, we don't have to go even read it, but just, this is a list of the common questions that the state lays out for you and answers to them. And you just scroll down, Jason.
Sorry.
It's all right. And there are tons of links, all sorts of questions, detailed, nitty-gritty questions that people will have when they think about the laws and the forms for one state. And why is Massachusetts an important state? That's a state where Ira Magaziner, I don't know what we should call Ira Magaziner. We've got dopey James Comey. We've got to have something to call Ira Magaziner. Shifty, well, that's Adam Schiff. Sleazy Ira Magaziner.
Something very strange going on, Charles.
All right, can I keep talking? Or?
Please.
So there are a lot of very detailed things you have to do to comply with Massachusetts law. One of them, fortunately, we stopped here on an important section. You see, this question here, are we required to file audited or reviewed financial statements with our state form PC? And here you'll see, if the organization has gross revenue of $500,000 or more, only audited financial statements are acceptable. Only audited financial statements are acceptable. This is in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They have never provided financial statements that are audited for the Clinton Foundation for any state in the Union, let alone for Massachusetts, and not even for the IRS. And then it goes on to say, all audited financial statements submitted to the Massachusetts Division must be prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, what's called GAAP. Right? So this is just telling you in one state, since 1998, when they began to operate, roughly 98 in Massachusetts, they had to produce audited financial statements and they didn't do it. I don't know if you can keep going or not.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
So here we go. If we just stop for a second here, you got to register. Foreign corporation means out of state. The Clinton Foundation is in Arkansas, therefore foreign corporation inside Massachusetts. You've got to register before you solicit.
Arkansas counts as foreign?
Yeah, that's just the way all of the states work. If you're Massachusetts, you're domestic. If you're outside Massachusetts, you're deemed to be foreign.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So there's a bevy of laws, a bevy of regulations. Again, I could spend an awful lot of time talking about all the many mistakes they made just in Massachusetts from the very beginning. And the problem with this is that in Massachusetts, if you're in violation of Massachusetts law for not providing audited financial statements in accordance with GAAP, if you've got a defect there that triggers an investigation, you have to notify most other states, virtually all other states, of the problem. So not only do you have a problem in Massachusetts, you're going to have a problem in every other state.
You can't do that.
You just can't do that. So if we could get back into the body of the slide, then I just want to hit this second link, if that's okay.
Yes.
And this gets you to a specific section, just one section of many in Massachusetts law. It's very long, and we're not going to read the whole thing. But what this says, basically, in the middle of it, is that if you got to explain to Massachusetts what your specific authorized purposes are, which in the beginning were to be, and it's actually always been, just to be a presidential archival depository and research facility in Little Rock. And if you make a change, you have to notify Massachusetts promptly, right? And that's clearly something they did not do. Beginning in 2001, early 2002, Ira Magaziner, from an office in Massachusetts, began to operate the Clinton, he didn't actually call it formally Clinton HIV AIDS Initiative, Inc. He just called it, I think, the HIV AIDS Consortium or something, from his office, his for-profit office.
Wow.
He began to operate this thing in 2002, and on behalf of the Presidential Foundation, without disclosing any of this.
And it's a crappy office. We've been over there.
Yeah, it's a crappy office. So, I mean, you could take it as read that in Massachusetts, the Clinton Foundation has big problems, and they go long back, and they can't say, well, it was a minor error, we corrected it. No, you've been a mess since 2001, 2002. If we go back into the slides, then in New York, here I want to do, if we can, if we hit this link, the third link, I've shown before, this one here, yeah. I've shown the law, the actual law before. In addition to the law provides in New York that you can create regulations to enforce the law. And these are the regulations that enforce New York laws for charities. And how many pages is it?
That looks like just the table of contents.
Right, this is just a table of contents we're going through. It tells you what page. 33 pages here.
Oh, 33.
There we go, not 93.
Wow.
But anyway, and if we can then go back into the link, I want to show people a few things. And Fabien, I hope you can hear this.
What do you mean, the link?
This one. No, this one rather. Sorry. All right, so if we punch into the EIN,
Love this website.
31-158-0204. And
It's
then
also
search.
extremely cool that you have their employer identification number memorized.
It's a sad comment on my personal life,
No,
though.
it should make the Clintons very concerned.
So did you hit search?
I did. It's spinning.
All right, it'll take just a second. All right, now we hit Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation. Hit that link, please. And it'll take a second, and then it's going to get us to their recent filings. And if we go down the page a little bit, we will see this one. On the 27th of June, 2017, they filed amended bylaws. All right, so click that, and it's right there.
Oh, it's downloading it. I see.
And I hope people around the world, you're looking at this and understanding what this is, okay? They only, in June 27th, 2017, did they bother in New York to file these amended and restated bylaws. If we go to the last page, you will see that these were filed September 10th, 2000. These were amended September 10th, 2015.
Something is making it really slow today.
Gremlins. There you go. That's when it was filed. Keep going up. Keep going up. Up.
Cheryl Mills.
No, this is actually. Keep going. There we go. September 10th, 2015, okay? We've talked about this in the past. That to me looks like a forged signature.
Yeah.
Does not look like his normal signature. But
Right.
they only filed June 27th, 2017, the fact that they had amended their bylaws on the 10th day of September 2015. This amendment was a material adverse change for two reasons. It concentrated control of the Clinton, continued to concentrate control of the Clinton Foundation in the hands of the Clinton family. And it was only by the 10th day of September 2015 that Hillary Clinton removed her name from being a controlling Class A director of the Clinton Foundation. So she was operating as a controlling Class A director of the Clinton Foundation. We've shown this to you before from November 2nd, 2013, when she was not running for office, but getting ready, feathering her nest to raise money for the endowment / her presidential campaign. You can't do both at the same time. Right the way through the 10th day of September 2015, the Clinton family illegally controlled the Clinton Foundation. And they have only notified New York State after Hillary lost the election, June 27, 2017, well after she lost the election. Had Bernie Sanders and his people done their homework, and we did try to contact them during the campaign and say, hey, look, you got some real problems here.
Wait, you tried to contact Bernie?
Yeah, absolutely. Through his political advisors.
Jan Weinberg actually gave Bernie...
Right. So this right here, I mean, this is an incredible disqualification on two grounds. That the Clinton family has illegally controlled this public charity since the 2nd of November 2013. It's been out raising money for operating expenses. It's been out raising money for the endowment. It hasn't made appropriate disclosures. It didn't tell New York State until just recently of this.
Wow.
And it certainly hasn't told Massachusetts. It hasn't told Michigan, and it hasn't told California. I'm not going to do a Howard Dean, but I could go on and on and on. It's told Georgia, but I don't know that it's told many other states that they basically blew themselves up on November 2nd, 2013.
And are still out of compliance.
Well, this is a change. It's like, you pull a pin on the grenade, you put it in your mouth, you blow your head up. You can't,
unblow up
it's worse than Humpty Dumpty.
Right. Got it.
So if we go then to, all right, so we've talked to you about Massachusetts, we've talked to you about New York. In addition, in New York, you have to go ahead and you have to tell New York about all your domestic and foreign government grants. They didn't do that either. And this is a very serious problem. But let's go to the great state, the great sanctuary state of California. And if we look here, there are, in California, as in the case of Massachusetts, as in the case of New York, foreigners outside this country can look through. Here's the summary page of all the many laws and regulations that apply to charities that want to solicit inside California. And there's our friend Xavier Becerra, who's
busy making illegal or fraudulent images of his server to give to the U.S. Capitol Police.
But this is a great site for those people who are not familiar with California law. It tells you about the special rules. And if we go back into the body of the slides, Jason, we're going to do a little bit of magic with the California Registry of Charitable Trusts thing. This is if you want to find out anything about how a charity is doing inside California, you go here. Now let's look at again in the FEIN 31 no dash 1580204, and then you hit search at the bottom. Then you hit that. Yeah, it says reporting incomplete on this. Okay,
first. I missed that.
Yeah.
Wait, let's look at that reporting incomplete.
Reporting incomplete. Okay, you're not allowed to have reporting incomplete. You've got to be in compliance, right?
How can they?
Well, we'll go back and look at it, and I'll show you. So up here, going slowly through this, you see it says, it gives you for 2002, it says they filled their form in by the 10th of September 2003, and it was accepted. You see that?
Yes.
They filled this one the 7th of June, and it was accepted. Keep going down, right? All of them accepted. Some are late past the deadline. The filing deadline is the 15th. Stop here for a second, please. The filing deadline is November 15th, 2009, but they turn it in January 19th, 2010. You're not allowed to do that, but Obama is president, and you do what you want. Keep on going down though, and we get to the most recent filing in here, and it says, what does that say there?
Ooh.
Something we don't like to have happen to us, whether you're a man, a woman, or otherwise.
Rejected.
You don't like to be rejected. So this was turned in on the 22nd of November 17th,
Why
2017,
rejected?
and their filing was rejected. That's a material adverse change. You can't be in California, a gigantic state where you're raising a lot of money, having fundraisers. You can't be doing that with your forms having been rejected. And then let's look further down here. We have a nice little Dear John letter that you don't want to get at the very bottom. It says, CT 550 form RRF incomplete.
Click that.
Yes, please.
Did it download?
Yep. Here. No, that's the wrong one. It must be this one, Jason. Sorry. Dated February 22nd, 2018. This is in connection to the 2016 report. Okay? The annual registration renewal fee report submitted on behalf of the captioned organization for the fiscal year 2016 is incomplete for the following reasons. Explanation information incomplete for yes answer to Part B, question number 6. All government funding, including grants from foreign governments, must be listed. So they didn't do it properly in California, and that's a letter dated February 22nd,
Wow.
2018.
Pretty
Okay?
recent.
And it says, in order to remain in compliance, please provide the requested information within 30 days of the date of this letter. That's very soon. This is a material adverse change in New York and in many states. This is a 2016 filing. It was due November 15th, 2017. You know?
They're busy. They got a lot of stuff
Yeah.
to do.
All right, so let's go back into the registry, and we're going to do another one.
Oh, the registry?
Yeah. And one, yeah. All right. And one, no. We have to go back into the links, I guess.
Okay.
So hit this one, yeah. Now we're going to go to the FEIN 271414646.
I'm sure when they're doing all this stuff, they're not thinking that you'll be...
And what this says current, but there's a problem with it. We hit that one, yeah. And you'll see again, same story, accepted, 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 if we go down the page. And here we see the one for 2015 is accepted, 16 is, quote, in process. They only supplied the RRF February 28th, 2018.
Oh, wow, that seems
for
very
2016.
late.
And then we go down here, and we have a letter. It says, first delinquency letter. That's going to be...
How do you find all this stuff, Charles?
Again, no life. All right, so this is the same idea. This is for Chai. It says, the Registry of Charitable Trusts has not received annual reports for the captioned organization as follows. Explanation information not provided for yes answer to Part B in government grants. Note, all government funding, foreign and domestic, must be listed with the name of agency, mailing address, contact person, and telephone number. So this is interesting because here you have New York and California, two gigantic states from a political standpoint with a lot of electoral college votes, out of the total. I think it's approaching 100 from just those two states.
What about the popular vote?
Well, who cares about the popular? but this is just incredible to me that we would have actually the state of New York and the state of California and the asleep, fact-free media not following up on the fact that these Democratic-controlled states are actually asking tough questions about forms that technically are illegally provided, with no hope of fixing them because they came in after the final filing deadline. This is a big problem, and you got to compare what they say in New York ultimately with what they say in California ultimately, and what they say in other states with what they tell the IRS, with what they tell the Department of Justice, with what they tell our foreign donors. They are now at a level here, I would argue, where the state governments are starting to close in.
The comments on Periscope are saying they're so screwed. Now, Charles, a lot of people I speak to, Larry Klayman and Jared Beck and even Mr. Hudson, they have kind of given up hope that Trump will drain the swamp. But I remain hopeful, largely because you have been very confident throughout this process that something will actually happen.
Well, it is, it's interesting we're talking about California here. In California, in certain gold strike states, and actually in other areas as well, other resource plays, whatever, it's quite common that the prospector, the grizzled prospector goes out there. Fabien and I had this experience with oil in France. We raised money for an oil project in France. We blew through the money, and we thought we were busted, and the thing was going to blow up. And we got lucky at the very end, and we made a very high rate of return on this prospect, just when it looked the worst. Similarly, in gold, in my family, somebody who went out to Montana, was basically out of money in 1864, having tried gold here and tried gold there and the person who was grub staking him, providing the equipment, said, "All right, I'll give you enough for one more."
This was the famous Levi Ortel.
Well, Levi, it's funny you should, that's in California, but my ancestor Eli Cook had a store right in that town, but a bigger store actually, but he didn't do as well. But the guy I'm talking about is a guy called Almond Spencer, who found a lot of gold in Montana in 1864. So when people are losing hope, even veterans like this, that's when, and I see the substance here, and I see the activity, I know what's going on around the world, fine, lose some hope. But don't at the victory celebration come up to me and say, "I was always believing in you. I always knew you'd come through." Right?
When you tell me a story about almond, what was the guy's
Spencer?
name? Yeah, I'm sure he founded almond farming in California. Another claim to fame of Ortel ancestry.
He did not found the Almond Joy candy bar because there's no D in his name. Anyway, if we go back into the slides here, then we have the same thing in Michigan. We have, if you hit this link here.
They've got to have a lot of electoral votes.
Well, they don't actually have a lot of electoral votes, but it's in a key state because it's been.
Yeah, why is that?
Because, that's weird.
Hey, it's government work.
All right, well, there is a link. That one doesn't seem to be working at this moment, but it was here actually. But I thought I got that right for you, but maybe not.
I'll try it one more time.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Anyway, we'll figure it out another time.
No, there was something missing when we hit it. That's a different one now.
I don't know. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a long, it gives you, now we've given you 4 different examples. Each state is slightly different, asking for information concerning your charity. Some care about certain things, others care about it. But every single state wants to know what were your authorized federal tax-exempt purposes. And you can't say, well, in Massachusetts, it's climate change. And in Montana, it's, skiing. You got to have one set of authorized tax-exempt purposes. And they've got to be crystal clear and specific. And if you change your purposes, you got to let people know. Now, Michigan is an interesting one. If we go to the next and final link, and Fabien, get ready because you're on deck finally. If we hit this link here, yeah, you got it. It looks as if a Democrat candidate for governor is leading the Attorney General of Michigan, who's in the process of running for governor of Michigan by 7 percentage points. But the interesting thing is, here's this Republican Attorney General. Did you hear that correctly? In Michigan, a Republican Attorney General who would have the ability to immediately launch, have his people investigate the Clinton Foundation. Why isn't the Michigan Attorney General? We have paperwork filed by the Clinton Foundation going back to 1997 that is consistently wrong. It's riddled with lies. It's riddled with material mistakes, and it omits crucial information. Why isn't the Attorney General of Michigan diving in here, forgetting about the fact that he's running for governor? Why isn't he doing it to protect the people of Michigan?
Well, wait a minute. Is the fact that he's running for governor playing a part in the reason?
I don't think so. Why? I think if I were running, I'd want to pound on this.
You should run.
No, but I don't want to run. But anyway, why don't we, with that, I wanted to finish that final thought. I don't know if we can still get it back. This thing in red at the very bottom.
From Michigan?
Yeah. No, this.
Oh, this.
In red.
Yes.
Oh, what happened?
Sorry.
It's okay.
Yes.
So, if you think about it, if the Democratic Party wants to ensure that Donald Trump is going to be a landslide victor, possibly approaching the same level as Ronald Reagan in 2020, then by all means continue to support and give cover to the Clinton Foundation. By all means, Elizabeth Warren, who already dropped out, but Andrew Cuomo in New York, the governor, Kamala Harris, the senator from California, by all means continue to defend the Clintons, defend this behavior, encourage the apparatus in your states not to go after this, because that will ensure that you will never get the nomination, and if by some miracle you do, that you will be pounded into the dirt by Donald Trump in 2020. Instead, right now, and really it's almost too late, what you should be doing, leading Democratic presidential contenders for 2020, what you should be doing is putting a knife, figuratively, into the back and the front of every one of the Clintons and their supporters. Because so long as you let the Clintons, soak up oxygen on the campaign trail, you're just making it easier and easier for Donald Trump to win. But, we win either way, so do what you want to do.
I'm a little sad that Elizabeth Warren dropped out. I mean, the insults alone would have been hilarious if she had run against Donald Trump.
Well, actually, I was thinking about that before we started. By dropping out, and we'll talk about this at the very end, by dropping out from the presidential contention, does that potentially cripple her effort to win re-election this fall as a senator? Because I'm pretty sure that her challenger, the Republican real Indian, American now, but from the Indian subcontinent Indian, he's a tough guy, and he's already demanding has been demanding she take an ancestry test for a long time. So the fact she's dropping out of the presidential race does not mean the end of her woes.
And people try to make that like a racist thing or whatever if he's challenging her saying that, but it's important to note that she used that to her advantage, saying that she was a minority, or what was that story?
Yeah, well, quickly, so what happened, Harvard had problems, particularly at the professional schools, the law schools, that a lot of the professors were white men. And it was not, this is back in the 80s, and so there were efforts, extreme pressures placed on the faculty, the president of Harvard, to have a more diverse group of professors, and it was in that environment that this woman came along who was an American Indian, supposedly, with qualifications, and they slapped her onto the faculty. And I would argue that she did get something of enormous value by asserting this fake Indian heritage.
Fake news.
Fake, that's real news.
Well, real news about her making a fake statement. Well, with that, why don't we transfer to the beautiful island of Japan, where our French correspondent will be filling us in on the French connection in this matter.
Yes, Jason, just one second. Can we reset the Skype link, because I can barely hear Charles, depending on how good it is.
I see. I'm afraid we've got much worse sound quality on you today than we did last time for some reason, Fabien. Is that the headphones that you're using?
The headphones? I don't think so. I can cut it.
However you were doing it last time sounded far better.
That's better. Can you hear me better now?
Absolutely.
Much better.
Much better.
Much better.
Much better. That's strange, because it's a good system. So, okay.
That's perfect. I can hear you now.
And then that's better?
Absolutely.
Okay, so thanks. Now we can start.
Yes.
We're going to go today through a detailed presentation of the links between the Clinton foundations and their various entities, namely, in this instance, what we call the CHIs, and Unitaid, which is a Swiss-based, Geneva-based NGO created by France, basically, in 2006. We do not intend, both Charles and I, to read line by line the document, which will be available on the internet after the show. But we're going to try to do a kind of discussion between the two of us and Jason as a moderator, basically, on the CHIs, on Unitaid, and going page by page. I suggest, Charles, that we go through one page, you handle CHI, I handle Unitaid, and at the end, you ask questions to me and vice versa, and Jason as well, and we just move from one page to the other so that the viewers can have progressively a much better understanding on what is actually the material situation of CHI on one end, and on the Unitaid end, how Unitaid actually donated very large amount of money. So we're talking about $291 million between 2006 and 2009 included, which is very substantial. And France is, in fact, by far the largest donor to the Clinton Foundation consolidated, which is, as Inspector Clouseau would say, this is a very big problem. Good. So there are just also that you know that at the end of this presentation, you will find a kind of vademecum to access not only the CHI and Clinton Foundation registries, and Charles has just gone through some of them in his previous presentation today, and you will therefore be able to access most links, actually most registries, which mainly are New York, Massachusetts, California, Mississippi, etc. And on Unitaid, there is also a description of where you can find the key information. And the key information is on their website. There are basically 3 sets of information, which are important, maybe 4 sets of information. The first one is their board minutes. The second one is their resolutions. And resolutions are basically decisions taken by the board, which should be minuted, and there are parts of the minutes, but sometimes, as you will see, minutes are not available, so we have to go to the resolutions to try to understand exactly what happened. And sometimes, and more often than sometimes actually, the resolutions are missing. Third set of information is the financial reports. These are officially vetted financial documents which are approved by the board every year, or in fact 2 years initially, which is very odd. Some of them are audited, others are not audited. And then finally you have what they call the annual report, which is a document which sits on their website. For every single year they've been in activity. And this document, to my knowledge, and I've looked through all the resolutions, and that represents about 3,000 pages, so it's not exactly a small amount of work. These annual reports have never been vetted by the board. So I don't know actually who decides within Unitaid how these reports are actually structured and controlled. So with this caveat, Charles, may I suggest we go back to this presentation, and just in passing, and trying to summarize our joint effort on this. And as we've explained last time on February 4th, Charles and I have been knowing each other for over 30 years, and I've been working together for at least 15 years, and in rather tough business environments, and we had to do investigations. So we know what we're talking about when it comes to investigation. and sort of try to summarize our respective skills, I would say that, one individually, taken individually, is actually a match for every single FBI investigator we've seen so far. But putting the two together, and depending on the perspective from which you're looking at us, would be like, we could be considered as, depending on that perspective, the dream team or the nightmare team. So let's go into this, and this presentation is probably a result of that joint approach. Bearing in mind that we will have a second presentation later in the month, this one addresses only the issues between 1997 to 2009 for CHAI and Unitaid. The next one will address the issues of CHAI and Unitaid between 2010 to today. And that's still work in progress. So going back to this presentation, Charles, may I suggest you go, we take one page, so you go through the CHAI issues, I go through the Unitaid ones, and then we exchange questions.
So do you want to move on to page 2 or 3?
It's page 3. Yes, I haven't gone through the page 2 disclaimer issues. It's just the standard one you are putting in front of your presentations. I've added stuff in relation to Unitaid and Cour des Comptes, but it's basically the same approach I have taken and we have taken in this document, which is to use public available information.
Good. So yes, let's move to page 3 then. Very good. So Fabien, you want me to start with this, or do you want to start? Or?
Well, if you agree, then you can discuss the CHAI issues, and I'll discuss the Unitaid one. Since there's no Unitaid on this first page, then just go through the CHAI issues you want to go through, because you know them better than I do. But I can also do that if you want. That's up to you.
Well, I'll quickly go through this page just to take people through it quickly. We've talked, and we're not going to read each sentence, but the reason Fabien did it this way, and I think it's a very good way for people who are not as familiar with the background as we all are at this point, you can read this presentation with no help, assuming you read English, and you will get the gist of why this is a very serious problem. We've told you before that the Clinton Foundation, the first Clinton Foundation, and really all Clinton the main Clinton Foundation, can only engage in tax-exempt purposes, which are building and endowing a presidential library and research center in Little Rock, Arkansas. That's all it can do. Everything else it's been doing is what's called ultra vires, outside the law. It's just not allowed. But it's, the Clintons do what they want. One thing that we found, and we haven't gotten the agreement yet, but on October 23rd, 2003, the Presidential Foundation, Ira Magaziner and Bill Clinton of the Presidential Foundation, neither of whom were officers, directors, or otherwise connected lawfully to the Clinton Foundation, signed an agreement with this crooked company, Ranbaxy, as well as a number of other Indian companies and a South African drug company, to promote the sale of these generic companies' HIV/AIDS drugs. You're not allowed to do that as a foundation, and in general, and the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation had no legal authority to have an HIV/AIDS initiative on October 23rd, 2003.
Will Elizabeth Warren force the Indian pharmaceutical company to take a DNA test?
You're going to make me choke here.
Sorry.
So Fabien noticed, and it's a very good thing, we've had access for some time to the, in quotes, audit of the Clinton Foundation that was performed by this schlock accounting firm called BKD, their Little Rock office. They put in this schlock audit report the idea that the Clinton Foundation has all these other highfalutin purposes to do, but there's nothing in the Articles of Incorporation by the time this 2003 audit report was finished, or indeed the predecessor one, the 2002, that gave the Clinton Foundation the authority to do any of these things that are in the audit, which means that not only did the accounting firm fail to do its work, but you can argue that the trustees of the Clinton Foundation misled the accounting firm. So another thing, I'd read earlier this modified, the fact that you have to provide your audit on the basis of U.S. generally accepted accounting principles. And here we find that they're not using generally accepted accounting principles. They're using something that you can't use called modified cash basis accounting. And of course, that's in the missing, in quotes, audits that are not on the Clinton Foundation website, but they're in Massachusetts, they're in California, they're in other states. And so the Clinton Foundation trustees, even now, or directors, even now, are trying to hide and deceive the public as the FBI, Department of Justice, and governments around the world continue to investigate. In 2002, we learned, actually, right before the election in 2016, we learned that the Clinton Foundation had been disciplined 3 times, starting in 2002 and then again in April 2003, for soliciting funds in Mississippi without registering. And there's a bevy of other problems. They haven't disclosed that serious problem in many of the other states in the early time frame. But it's not just Mississippi, as it turns out, where they did this wrong. In New Hampshire, they had a similar problem. And in Pennsylvania, they had a problem with their fundraisers. So, just points 1 through 4 would bury a foundation, a normal foundation that wasn't attached to the Clintons. But by point 5, Bruce Lindsay, who was not an officer of the Clinton Foundation, according to the Clinton Foundation filings, sets up this new entity, which is controlled by the Clinton Foundation, called Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, on March 24th, 2004. He wasn't authorized to do that. The Clinton Foundation had no authority to do that. That gutted the status of the Clinton Foundation just as they were finishing the Little Rock complex, just as they were negotiating to give it to the National Archives. And then on November 18th, 2004, the Clinton Foundation basically defrauds we the people in the United States of America, signing a legal agreement that is rife with errors and misstatements and omits crucial facts. So this is not even, it's not an abortion, it's not a stillbirth, it's what happens when you drop an EMP weapon on an entity. It's just absurd on its face. And then we're talking about a time frame here, during this entire time frame under consideration, the FBI and the Department of Justice were investigating this period in a 4-year-long running investigation involving Bob Mueller, James Comey, and a host of other people, and they didn't see any of this obvious stuff. So we could move along to the next page.
Possible that the FBI, which I think right now is getting its hands on the issue, and most probably going into these issues, how is it possible that between 2002 and 2005, it could have been missing these issues which you so blatantly identified, and which basically have been sitting like an elephant in plain sight that nobody wanted to see?
Well, Charles actually knows someone who hid an elephant in plain sight.
That's right, I actually do. Peter Weng, but this poor guy has passed along. But I think, Fabien, if the answer comes out, the answer is going to be a very bad answer. And that is that after September 11th, 2001, in this country and in other countries, but in this country, Americans rolled over and gave the FBI, the CIA, and other security services too much power. At the same time, technology allowed these services to capture a lot of information that would make powerful people look bad. Also in this time frame, Enron blew up in November of 2001, and there began to be a slew of these companies that blew up. Some touched the Democrats, some touched the Republicans. Enron was very much a Republican problem. Ken Lay at Enron and others were rumored to be big supporters to the Bushes. In 2004, you had a presidential campaign, re-election campaign coming up. So I would bet that if you and I, Fabien and Jason, we were given the ability to go and look at the actual records, we would find that some kind of compromise was struck. That people said, look, it's too close to the election. We're not going to go after Bush for Enron if you don't go after Clinton for the Clinton Foundation. Let's just put those issues on the side, see who wins the election, and move on as a guess.
I think you're too generous sometimes. It's pretty well known that Kenny Boy, some earthquake happening there. Kenneth Lay, I saw a video with George W. Bush sending like a Christmas card to Kenneth Lay, and he calls him like Kenny Boy or something. They're very close friends. And I have a feeling that there's no deal struck. They're all just constantly covering each other's crimes.
Well, but I get that, but I'm saying, why wouldn't, if you're going to do that and just be one-sided, why wouldn't you go after the Clinton Foundation as well?
Because the Bushes and the Clintons are two sides of a coin. They're just, you can't nail one without the other.
So I think, Fabien, I'll quickly take points 7 and 8, and then I'll pass it to you. How's that?
Okay.
So, in theory, the Presidential Foundation's bylaws changed the name of the Clinton Foundation from the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation to the William J. Clinton Foundation, just taking the word presidential out of it. But there is abundant evidence in the public record that suggests that change did not occur actually on April 25th, 2005, because there are quite a few filings in countries around the world and elsewhere, and press releases, and in 990s annual reports that state the name of the Clinton Foundation was the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. They changed the name, and that's actually, they changed the name, but they did not change its authorized purposes on that date, all right? And then by June 30th, 2005, this in quotes audit for 2004 that is a complete fraud, not compliant with any of the regulations that pertain to auditing not-for-profit corporations. They claim in the audit that the Clinton Foundation had these expanded purposes when they didn't. So that's June 30th, 2005. At this moment, it's crucial to the Clinton Foundation to be able to put forward with France and with these other donors the idea that it was authorized for HIV/AIDS to get the gigantic sums of money that Unitaid was going to give the Clinton Foundation. With that, I turn the baton to Fabien on point 9.
Point 9. So in 2005, Mr. Bill Clinton and Mr. Douste Blazy, being Foreign Minister of France, meet in Chappaqua at the Clintons' home, and they try to hatch the idea of raising new funds to fight HIV/AIDS, hence the idea of microtax. That idea of microtax comes from, unfortunately, France. It was an idea hatched between Mr. Douste Blazy and President Chirac. And obviously, Mr. Bill Clinton, when he heard about it, was a very staunch supporter. For one, I think, very clear reason is that would allow him to leave a situation where he was raising money on an artisanal scale to a much better situation where he would raise money on an industrial scale without too much effort, since that money would be raised by governments, and namely France at this stage, and through tax. So no effort, basically just receiving the money and spend it. So that's when the whole thing basically started. Now, I forgot to put in the source, but the source is actually the book written by Mr. Douste Blazy himself in 2009. Charles, I think you raised the attention to my attention to this book. Was it Power Numbers, something like that?
Power and Numbers was written sometime in 2009 and published in January of 2010.
Okay. So from that onwards, Mr. Douste-Blazy, with Mr. Chirac's vetting, started similar discussions with the UK, Chile, Brazil, Norway, and Spain to actually set up what became a bit later Unitaid. Charles, please go on, Pontaine.
Yes.
10 and thereafter.
Sure. So what happened is that the Clinton Foundation, of course, excludes the tax return for this old chai that was set up March 24th, 2004. They don't want you to see that tax return because it's a major league problem for many reasons that we'll get into in subsequent presentations. But they filed this tax return on October 5th, 2005 for 2004. And in brief, what it shows you is that this entity had very substantial operations in relation to the Presidential Foundation. And the test in America is that you cannot engage in activities outside your authorized purposes that are, quote, more than insubstantial, which has been held to mean more than $1,000. And we're talking here about $6 million. And by expense categories, big amounts versus the other thing. So the supposition is that by some time before December 31st, 2005, the IRS, and most likely this lady Lois Lerner, must have rejected, for excellent reasons, Old Chai's application for tax exemption. Turning to you, Fabien, on point 12.
Yes, so December 2005, the French Parliament votes the implementation of that mutual tax on airline tickets. So the financing mechanism is in place to allow Unitaid to start funding Chai or the various Clinton entities whose activity relates to fighting HIV/AIDS around the world. Now, at this stage, as you can see, the issue is what are the actual activities, financial means, number of employees of the Clinton entities, and are they able to actually absorb a funding of several hundreds of millions of dollars and use it effectively in tens of different countries to distribute drugs around the world. And as you can probably see already, that's not the case because it is a very, very small entity. So, Charles, please go on point number 13. And excuse me 1 second.
Sure. So we've talked about this in the past, that a merger document was created. It is not, people who are not familiar, as Fabien and I are, with how mergers really work and are implemented, people who are unfamiliar with those rules would look at the document and say, well, that sounds like a merger agreement to me. But we can look at it and say, this is not a merger agreement. It doesn't have the standard representations and warranties about each entity being duly organized or lawfully organized and operated consistent with applicable laws. There are no financial statements. It doesn't get into the issues of how you're supposed to deal with all the foreign subsidiaries that were created, either of this old Chai or of the Clinton Foundation illegally around the world. So none of the things that should be there are there. On top of which, under Arkansas state law, lawyers tell me, and I can see with my own eyes, and Fabien as well, Jason as well, that you're not allowed to merge an entity out of legal existence, a charity out of legal existence, that would be Old Chai, into the Clinton Foundation, unless the Clinton Foundation is authorized to take on the, in theory, authorized purposes of Old Chai. And you can't take one thing, the Clinton Presidential Foundation, that in theory was a federally tax-exempt charity, and merge it with a for-profit corporation or a non-compliant corporation. You just can't do what they actually claim they did do. And the miracle for me in all this, having worked with Fabien in France and worked with others around the world and with Fabien around the world, even for a small transaction like this, several $100 million of aid going into this thing, lawyers would be brought into the picture normally, and lawyers would see this immediately. It's not rocket science to see this. It's not difficult. Even back then, it was probably possible to get all these documents and filings online. And a serious law firm that the French government should have retained before it did any of this should have seen this. So the real question should be, as we think about all this, not is this an obvious fraud? How come the French and other donors to Unitate didn't catch this? They had months and months and years to look into this. Why didn't they see any of this? So maybe we'll go to the next page. So I'll take...
Yes, maybe. No, sorry, Charles, just on 2005 before we move on 2006. So basically, who is operating CHAI at the end of 2005? I mean, is it the Clinton Foundation operating CHAI as a program? Or is it the CHAI entity who is itself registered or incorporated foundation, or is it both?
I think
operating at the same time.
I think that's the problem. I think the answer is both. I think that and that's why it's so dangerous to do. That's why the authorities don't allow you normally to do this. You need to have crystal clarity about how a charity operates. You can't be saying that I've got this thing over here, Old CHAI, that's doing some work out of Massachusetts, and then I got this thing in Arkansas that may be doing some work on a library, and then I got another thing in New York that could be doing something else, and I got some operation in Tanzania and South Africa and India. You can't have what is called an informal aggregation of people and entities claiming that they're all doing this work. It has to be tightly controlled from a U.S. base. So anybody who understood charity law, and the French government, probably doesn't have as much debt as the U.S. government. So back in 2005 at year end, the French government could have afforded to pay for a really expensive lawyer to figure this out, or to find a cheap law student who would have figured it out, and they would have seen all this.
Yeah.
So shall we move?
So basically, from a Unitate standpoint, when they send money to CHAI, they don't know which is which, and if they don't investigate or do any due diligence, before committing, they're pretty dumb. Wouldn't you say that?
Well, yeah. Sorry, Fabien. What I would say, sorry, Jason. What I would say is that I do know from working with you that when money is moved internationally, particularly from France to Switzerland, from Switzerland around the world, there's a record. And Unitate, France should be demanding from Unitate, and the money that we sent to you, and that you say you sent to the Clinton Foundation, we want to know on what dates you sent monies to the Clinton Foundation for this HIV/AIDS program. We want proof that you did it. We want to know what currencies you used, what addresses the monies went to. What were the, which countries did they go to? And we want to see proof that this money actually hit its intended location. And we also want to understand, did anybody in Unitate have any questions about this? Did it ever dawn on them that there could be some problems here? Or were the people in Unitate quite happy to go along with this because they knew the Clinton Foundation wasn't going to get the money, and they were just sitting there dividing up the money?
I think it's got to be something like that, Charles. I mean, how else could everybody be missing all these things and not prosecuting all these crimes? I mean, it's literally like the gang initiation where they make you kill somebody. So now anything goes south, they got dirt on you. This is why Comey is obstructing the investigation, and all these guys have got to be in on it. And that makes them not want to spill the beans.
I think you're right. So do you want to jump into 16, Fabien, or?
That's fine, yes, please. And don't hesitate if you have any questions on Unitate, to ask me.
Sure. So
Why don't you take
So-
16, Fabien?
Yeah, take the balance of this page, if you would.
Okay, okay. So on July 1st, 2006, the airline tax, which is nicknamed actually the Chirac tax, is implemented by France, and United is allocated about 90% of it. And the source of this information is actually Cour des Comptes, which is the French government audit body, which has no equivalent, I think, in the US, and which has issued a report later, which we will discuss. A bit later, on July 24th and even August 7th, the joint CFO for Clinton Foundation and for Old Chai asked the IRS for a 3-month extension of the fining for its 2005 accounts. A bit later, on September 11th, United is actually legally incorporated by France, the UK, Norway, Brazil, and Chile. On September 19th, so a week after, the World Health Organization, which is a key United Nations entity in charge of health, announces the launch of United, which is a drug purchase facility. It is not a legal entity. It's a drug purchase facility which is going to work in coordination with WHO, the Global Fund, UNICEF, and the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative to fight AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. Obviously, the intention is great. And there is actually a big problem in the world at that time, which is that if you want to respond to severe illnesses around the world, it is actually almost impossible to do so using the standard international entities or intergovernmental entities. So United was created out of a need, a so-called market need, which was to send money through an entity which could react very quickly and bypass a number of established players or use them if necessary. And to some extent, and to be fair, it has been successful in this respect. But it has also cut a lot of corners, as we will see. So on October 9th, 2006, we have the first board meeting of United. Now, just that you know, if some of you want to go on the United website, they will see some Kabbalistic signs. Kabbalistic signs being EB1, EB2, EB3. EB is for Executive Board. So EB1 is the first board meeting, and under it there is the minutes of that first board meeting numbered EB1, and etc., etc. Now, sorry, are you looking for the...
Yeah, is it in governance? Yeah, there's the executive board. Here we have the executive board's resolutions and minutes.
Yes.
That one, yeah. That's what Fabien, so you can scroll all the way down, if you would.
Well, actually, strange because, well, it's, yes, you can scroll down and...
To the very beginning.
You have EB26 and EB25. Now you also have EB special. They have therefore special board meetings, which I discovered to be once a year, usually in March or April. Some of these special sessions or special board meetings are numbered, others are not. and it's actually quite a mess, as we will discuss this presentation.
So if you can go all the way down to the very beginning.
You have altogether about 27
Here's the first
board minutes available on the website. There are at least 12 or 13 missing. So here it is. That's why you have on this specific page, which has been screen copied at the end of this presentation, actually. You have the list of the resolutions this time, but you can access through the same page the board minutes, and you have altogether over 360 resolutions, which were taken on various subjects. So it's quite a big piece of work to actually go through that.
Right, and I think, Fabien, it's worth saying that when people talk to me about this, when they want to try to criticize, often they say, well, you guys are talking about generalities, and there's no obvious offenses, and there's no details here. And they clearly haven't looked at the presentations that we've done in the past, but when you look at this, and FBI, if you're listening, CIA, if you're listening, NSA, if you're listening, attorneys general, if you're listening to this, I mean, there is a wealth of information here. We're going to go through it now. Not all this information, but just a few high-level cases. Where you will see what we're talking about. It is obvious that there's been a long-standard pattern and practice of defrauding multiple countries around the world, multiple donors, millions of travelers, that the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative never legally existed, began operating in this connection in earnest in 2005, getting money in 2006. This has been a massive fraud, defrauding Unitaid, and yet Unitaid doesn't seem to care.
Well, you just brought up an important point as well. It wasn't just defrauding Unitaid, it was everybody who flew to France, got money basically stolen from them. We've got Jeanette in the comments saying, so Australia and now France are going after Hillary. Oh, happy day.
We'll have to do this.
But it's a good sign to see that there are governments now closing in with investigations.
Well, as Fabien has been saying, it's not just France. Remember that Unitaid is, I think, 19 different governments or so, 19, 20 governments. France being the biggest, UK being in there in big time, Norway big, Chile big, South Korea big, Spain big, and then a bunch of smaller players. But you're right.
And Brazil and Korea. Yeah.
Right. So if we can...
sorry.
Go ahead, Fabien.
So just on point 20, the interesting thing is that, we're sitting in 2006, Unitaid started operating in September, and already in October, Unitaid discloses in its first board meeting that it has authorized the disbursement of $9.1 million to the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, in brackets, CHI. Yeah. So that's a very fast start. Now, that disbursement is subject to a certain number of conditions. The three key conditions. The first one is an MOU between Unitaid and Old CHI. The second one being a disclosure of MOUs between Old CHI and beneficial countries. And the third one being disclosure of contracts between Old CHI and drug suppliers. And there is even a fourth one, which is the disclosure to Unitaid of MOUs to be signed. The fourth one being MOUs to be signed by Unitaid with beneficial countries. As you can imagine, if you apply these sets of four conditions to, let's say, 15 countries, it's quite a massive work which cannot be done in a few minutes, unless the MOU is what it is under US law, which is a non-binding agreement. Okay, I'm unclear of what is the meaning of the MOU on the Unitaid legal system, the legal system used by Unitaid. I'm not sure whether it's actually Swiss law or American law or another law, and I've never seen these MOUs. But it's just a bit weird to sort of suddenly start 1 month later you disburse $9 million under these conditions, and I wonder even if these conditions were actually met for whatever they mean, and I don't know what they mean, whether there was actually a check later that these conditions had actually been met.
Well, Fabien, you make an excellent point, and I want to just add one little thing into the analysis, if I may.
Please, please.
What do you think happened several days after November 1st, 2006?
Well,
Hillary was running for re-election to the Senate in a campaign that needed a lot of money. Is it possible that pressure was put on Unitaid to get this $9.1 million towards Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative because the Clintons wanted to make sure that some of that money could be used to pay off vendors to the Hillary Clinton Senate campaign? And I asked that question because Jason and I and others have found evidence of a bank account being held in the name of the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative in 2006, blocks away from Hillary Clinton's Senate offices, re-election campaign offices on near 32nd Street. The account was on 32nd, 33rd Street and 6th Avenue. And FBI, you have the ability to check this. You have the ability to see what we're talking about here, to find these bank accounts. And you should consider doing that because, my suspicion, and it's nothing more than a suspicion based on now 3 years almost of doing this, is that there's no coincidence when you see bank accounts, when you see pressure points, when you grow to appreciate that Hillary Clinton announced for president of the United States, her first campaign, January 20th, 2007. She needed to win that re-election campaign. They've been thinking through her announcement by this time. She needed that money, if not for the Senate campaign, to set up for the presidential campaign.
There is one coincidence. There's no bank at all at the address that they gave for that payment. It's down the street from the bank.
That's right.
Coincidentally.
But Fabien, I had forgotten about point 21, and I would encourage you to dwell on this point. This is a great point.
Yes, it's something which you identified earlier on, Charles, and which is this study by the Hudson Institute, which is actually available on the internet. I've just sort of summarized what they were writing at that time in 2006, November 1st, 2006. First point is on the IRS rule. The Unitaid drug purchase facilities is, and I quote, neither charitable nor educational, but profit-making. That's clear. Second point is that the Hudson Institute recommends that the Clinton Foundation has a prior discussion with the IRS, and that should take place immediately. And we are November 1st, 2006. The third point is that Unitaid is not a legal entity, as I was explaining earlier. It is managed by WHO, so the World Health Organization, and it is therefore under the protection of the U.S. international organizations Act, which defines the rules of engagement between the U.S. and international organizations. And specifically, it defines what is called privileges and immunities for these international organizations, for their activities, for their assets, and for their personnel. And these privileges and immunities, the Hudson Institute states, only exist provided that these international organizations or institutions conduct non-profit only activities. So that's an interesting point, because until now we were under the impression that United and de facto the Clinton Foundation were protected by this set of rules. And if it can be demonstrated that these activities are actually profitable under US tax laws, then that protection falls.
Right. And a further point, just for people who are not familiar with, with the U.S. International Organizations Immunities Act, that act gives the power to the U.S. president to strip an organization of its immunity. The unilateral power of Donald J. Trump. Are you listening, FBI? Are you listening, Department of Justice? You need to study this act, because just the facts that we've given you through 2006 would give Donald Trump the ability to strip the U.S. International Organizations Immunities Act protection for United and maybe even for WHO, which would be quite a stick for the U.S. president to have if it wanted to, let's say, renegotiate the way in which the World Health Organization operated and the way in which American large donors like the Gates Foundation and Michael Bloomberg and others and the Ford Foundation and many U.S. charities give money to the WHO. This would seem to be an enormous lever to use to bring these organizations to heel.
Now, the next point, the Hudson Institute is also providing a very sharp response. Is the following. They state that Unitaid's rationale is, I quote, weak. I still quote, redundant with existing programs fighting AIDS, and no less violates Article 37 of the Constitution of the WHO, as well as Article 2 of the UN Charter. That's not exactly insignificant. And last point we should notice is that Unitaid is supposedly managed by its board, when at the same time this is also claimed by WHO. In other terms, Unitaid is managed by both its own board and separate to WHO, which is what we call in French a recipe for disaster.
I understand French.
Yes, good. Well, it's French cuisine, recipe for disaster. Point number 2, your turn, Charles.
So the Clinton Foundation filed its IRS annual report for 2005 on November 6th, 2006. Now this is interesting in that you only find that out not on the Clinton Foundation website, but by going to the ProPublica Nonprofit Explorer website that shows you this version. The Clinton Foundation filing is dated December 20th, 2006, which is impossible. You're not allowed to file after November 15th, 2006. So there are two versions of this. And this version does not include tons of information which is required. And also incorrectly states that the reason they changed their accounting method is because they wanted to follow an accounting method used by Old Chai. That isn't true. In 2004, Old Chai used the cash method of accounting. Old Chai illegally, in its filing, changed to accrual without explaining why. They didn't file that form. And so this is all a nonsense. This is just tortured, invented nonsense, which of course you're not going to see unless you can find the agreements that we have found. So this is more and more evidence that this is a conspiracy. This is not something that happened by accident. This is a bunch of people doing whatever they can to make sure they strap themselves up to the Unitaid feed bag and make sure they're going to get hundreds of millions of dollars every year into this loosely controlled foundation to do with it whatever they want. So again, FBI, you have to pull all this, please pull this all together to see that this is not a bunch of technical infractions that happen in one period or during a tense moment when people were busy. This is a long-standing pattern and practice of conspiracy and obstruction of justice dating all the way back to October 23rd, 1997, covering multiple states, multiple countries, multiple forms of wiring money, sending money. And it's, as we said before, it's the largest set of unprosecuted charity frauds in history. So if we go to the next page.
I apologize, Charles. I'm busy submitting a copyright complaint because there is someone who is illicitly rebroadcasting our broadcast right now.
Is that right? Who is that person?
Well, I'm not going to mention their YouTube channel because they're losers, but they're going to get a copyright notification and hopefully they'll be put out of business.
All right, good. So then at point 23, same problems. This on November 16th, 2006, Old Chai files its annual report for 2005. Of course, the Clinton Foundation does not include this on its website. And of course, this version of the document doesn't contain key information concerning how it was liquidated. Of course, I mean, there are multiple major league flaws, and there's no audit as is required. So there's a long litany of problems in point 23 that we needn't dwell on at this moment. So, Fabien, to you.
Okay, so still in that year, which shows a very fast start by Unitaid. On November 26, 2006, Unitaid's board decides to commit to programs for a princely sum of $174 million, including the no less princely sum of $160 million to Old Chai for 2007 and 2008. The board minute which describes this actually also describes or mentions that Indian Ranbaxy drug company has just managed to produce a low-cost generic combination of so-called ARVs for children. A bit later, on November 30th, Mr. Duste Blasi, Mr. Bill Clinton, and Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, Prime Minister of India, publicly announced together the production by Ranbaxy and Cipla, two Indian generic drug companies. So the production by these two companies of pediatric ARVs, and Mr. Bill Clinton on this occasion announces that Unitaid will disperse in 2006, can you believe it, $350 million to his Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative, I quote. And this Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative, which, by the way, is supposedly merged or liquidated on December 31st, 2005. That is a big problem. Huh? Then, apparently, in the following weeks, from what Unitaid states in the 2000 report, these drugs will be distributed in China, in Malawi, and remember, in Papua New Guinea, through Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative. And as you probably remember, for those who have listened to previous shows by Charles, especially the shows which related to Australia, the Papua New Guinea program has been financed heavily by Australia. And now we discover by Unitaid at the same time. So that's a lot of money for small Papua New Guinea, I think. And that's worth looking into seriously. Charles, 27?
Sure. We mentioned briefly that the Clinton Foundation has on its website a December 20th, 2006 version of their annual report for 2005, but it doesn't contain the required merger documents, and And after that date, Old Chai and the Clinton Foundation still operate as separate entities. So it's a very, very strange and botched report that the FBI needs to put in a comprehensive timeline and understand, which version of the 2005 990 was filed in every single U.S. state. Was the Clinton Foundation at this point filing in foreign countries? If so, what filings were they making in all these foreign countries? Put together one comprehensive timeline to see the degree to which this is a sloppy mess, and in addition, so an illegal sloppy mess, because you can't have a sloppy mess in a U.S. foundation operating internationally. You're just not allowed to do it. So, well, they did do it. So, but we have to go back and have our FBI, the good people, men and women in the FBI, go back and put this timeline together in the U.S. and around the world. And, it's just a disqualifying timeline. Again, in a period where Hillary Clinton and her people, Bill Clinton, are gearing up to run Hillary Clinton to seeking to earn her place in history as the first female president of the United States. Fabien, 28.
Should I move on?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the last point we want to make for 2006, and it's again, we're insisting on it heavily, is that at the end of 2006, money has been starting flowing to the Chai. We call it the Chai. Now, what is the Chai? The Chai is at the same time the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc., a legal entity which has not been liquidated, but is supposedly merged into the William G. Clinton Foundation. And that's the first entity. The second one is the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, a program of the William G. Clinton Foundation, following the so-called merger. None being authorized by the IRS to undertake a drug purchase facility, even against AIDS, nor internationally, and certainly not tax exempt. So that is a big problem. Yeah, that's how United could start sending money to. I assume, I'm assuming they knew which entity, but I'm not sure. This needs to be checked and even examined, and if not investigated in depth. We've just finished the 2006 year. Charles and Jason, do you have any questions?
Well,
you would like to raise?
There's a question from the live chat here. They want to know, Charles, if the FBI has asked you for help. I presume if they have, you can't tell us.
I have not had any direct contact with the FBI. That's all I will say.
Other than Robin Gritz.
Right. She's not at the FBI.
Former. Yeah. Reinstate Robin Gritz.
Well, I think at one stage, Fabien, you tell us when we should get into this, but at one stage, I think we would like to know, our audience and Americans would like to know, what is the French government doing about this? Now, we can wait till the end of this to talk about it, or whenever you want.
Yes. No, we can wait to the end, so that's
okay.
We'll keep our viewers interested up to the last second.
Okay. So just FYI, we're in this now for almost 2 hours, just so you know.
Yes. And I need to go in about an hour and 15 minutes, as I told you.
All right, good. Okay.
So we still have an hour and 15 minutes from my standpoint.
Good, okay. Over to you.
So we're in 2007, so it's my turn now. For the year 2007, well, let's say that on March 8th, the board decided that, first, acknowledged that $9.1 million had been dispersed already to Chai. Then, and I'm trying to make it short, a bit later on May 7th, the board has increased its budget for 2007 from 174 million, which is the figure we mentioned a bit earlier, to now $300 million, without actually any revised budget being approved. And also the board mentions that the 2008 budget will exceed $400 million. So now we're talking about serious money coming.
So Fabien, what was happening in 2007 and 8 in the American political scene?
Well, the usual culprits, no?
Was Hillary Clinton perhaps trying to get some money, some money together, maybe?
Well, I would assume that's called elections.
Exactly. Primary and general.
So on May 16th, Mr. Douste Blazy, who is now chairman of United as a founder, but also a foreign minister, resigns from his posting as foreign minister since Mr. Sarkozy has been elected as president. But he's shortly thereafter appointed Nicolas Sarkozy's advisor at the Élysée Palace. So Mr. Douste Blazy is at the same time United chairman and advisor to Mr. Sarkozy. And a bit later, he is going to be nominated also a full-time professor at a Paris-based hospital called Lariboisière. Bearing in mind that Mr. Douste Blazy is trained as a doctor and a cardiologist, actually, as a specialist cardiologist. So he's doing a lot of things at the same time. Charles, can you talk about point 34, this interesting UK angle to our situation?
Sure. So on July 7th, 2007, bearing in mind that right before then, Tony Blair had stepped away from being prime minister in the UK. In England, the Clinton Foundation creates something called the William J. Clinton Foundation UK, but gives this new entity under UK law much wider authority than the US version, the controlling US version, would allow any foreign subsidiary to have. So in so doing, commits a fraud upon the UK public, the UK government, and they do this, of course, it's Bruce Lindsay and Andrew Kessel. Bruce, by this time, is the CEO of the Clinton Foundation. Andrew Kessel is the CFO of the Clinton Foundation. They affix their signatures to multiple legal documents which are false and materially misleading, and obtain permission under the UK law to operate this charity. So this is a standard pattern and practice of the conspiracy that you lie across state lines, across national boundaries, figuring that nobody in the UK will ever check. But this is very surprising because the UK was involved with Bill Clinton and the Clinton Foundation going all the way back, certainly to 2002, maybe earlier. And one would imagine that the sovereign government of the UK had the wherewithal to hire a decent law firm and figure all this stuff out. But again, instead of figuring it out, they allowed this fraud to expand in July 7th, 2007. And as a guess, this mechanism was used as a workaround to satisfy the French that through this William J. Clinton Foundation UK, the Clinton Foundation did indeed have the right to fight HIV/AIDS.
Okay, so going back to United, this young entity on July 9th, which has less than 9 months, has an interesting, and when one can see that something interesting happens, the newly appointed CFO, Mrs. Boucher, resigns after 9 months into the job. I would like to know why. Maybe for personal reasons, but it is for personal reasons. On October 6th, United has another board. Interestingly, the minutes are not available, nor the resolutions. And we'll come back to that point a bit later. And it should have been number EB6, but the problem is that EB6 is carried by the next board, which is on December 6th. So there is a problem of numbering board minutes at Unitaid. And bearing in mind that when you run a board, and I've run quite a few as well as Charles, and in my case, I've run even boards of public companies, you are supposed to minute every single board minute, and this actually has one key objective, which is to ensure that no additional board minutes are retroactively inserted into the board book. In other terms, that board minute forgeries are actually used. So if a company starts meddling with its board minute numbers, it's not good. Next, December 2007, so a bit more than 1 year after Unitaid was created, Korea joins as a board member, having itself introduced a tax on airline ticket in 2007. And that closes the year 2007. Charles, do you have any question on Unitaid?
No, that's good. We should move along, I think.
And I have no questions on Chai, except the UK Chai seems to be very odd because they received 1 million sterling, which is not a small amount of money. That went to the Clinton Global Initiative. Is it? Yes, the Clinton Global Climate Initiative. Have you done any work on that Clinton entity yet?
Oh, indeed. So the Clinton Climate Initiative, we're going to do I've been saving this. We're going to do a special broadcast on the Clinton Climate Initiative. I'm not sure when because we have so much stuff going on. But at least the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative bothered to make the pretense of having formal legal documents. Clinton Climate Initiative never did, and operated starting in 2006, and only eventually sort of tried to regularize itself beginning, I believe, in November of 2011, but it operated from 6 to through much of 2011 with no legal entity whatsoever. So there's no way in which the UK Foundation should have sent money to something that legally didn't exist, the Clinton Climate Initiative. And on top of which, the Clinton Climate Initiative, like as the Hudson Institute suggested, the Clinton Climate Initiative doesn't have a valid charitable purpose. The Clinton Climate Initiative is an excuse for mayors of large cities and vendors of equipment to those large cities and financiers of projects for those large cities to convene in secret away from the press and hatch deals that make investors and banks and advisors rich and may or may not help the climate, but in no way are authorized as valid tax-exempt purposes statutorily or even covered in the Clinton Foundation legal documents. So that's we're going to do more than one show just on that issue, probably playing off my favorite Sesame Street character, Kermit the Frog, and calling that one, "It's Not Easy Being Green." Right. So stay tuned for that one.
I don't know if people realize this, Charles, but although I'm making the graphics, the movie ideas come from you.
This is what happens when you spend too much time banking and you have no personal life. Anyway, Fabio.
Okay, so let's move into 2008, gentlemen.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Right. In 2008, on January 1st, 2008, we have an annual report published, which, as I've already stated in the past, these annual reports have never been approved by the board. and will never be approved by the board. So I think that's a bit of a problem. And at that point, United has received $369 million, including $268 million from France, so that's 73%. That is not a small percentage. And United has committed about $222 million to various programs, and disbursed about $142 million already, including $72 million to Old Child. That represents 50% of its disbursements. It's a very high percent. Your turn,
Yes.
Charles.
So the audit report for the renamed Clinton Foundation for the year 2006 comes out way past the filing deadline on January 9th, 2008. It is woefully deficient in numerous respects. It is a boldly fraudulent, non-compliant document. Not even pretending to be an audit, but not an audit, not even done in conformity with United States generally accepted accounting principles. We are in process of producing hundreds of pages of exhibits, taking the detail-oriented people through why this is a complete sham, and has as a reason for being a sham the fact that they want to hide the degree to which $64 million was stolen from the Clinton Foundation between 2004 and 2006. So there's a very good reason to have all these problems, a motivation to have all these problems, but take it as read that this document's a fraud. Bill Clinton is mentioned here as being honorary chairman of the Clinton Foundation in 2006. That's not possible. And the Clinton Global Initiative meetings are said to have been held at a total cost of $6.6 million, which is a big amount of money. Then on January 28th, 2008, and here FBI, Department of Justice, here you really need to listen up. There's a lot of problems with the books and records of the Clinton Foundation. And this would all be harmless in a sense. It would be a minor matter if it would just involve money. But on January 28th, 2008, John Glasgow, who was the CFO of the construction company, the principal construction company that built the Clinton Library in Little Rock, disappears. And not until March 12th, 2015, which is just around the time, within days, of the secret server, Hillary Clinton's secret server being revealed, that his body is found March 12, 2015. There's no statute of limitations on murder. And I'm no expert, I'm not a criminal expert, but it certainly seems unlikely to me that somebody would disappear who would have been questioning potentially the accounting for the construction contract that is highly questionable, where I have all kinds of questions just looking at the public filings there. I see $64 million being diverted. Here's a financially sophisticated guy raising questions. Newspaper accounts suggest that before the 28th of January 2008, he was engaged in heated discussions with one person who had previously worked at this accounting firm, BKD, challenging something. Then this guy walks out the front door, disappears, is ultimately found in a state park with an antique rifle next to him.
Ooh, that's so similar to Vince Foster.
Exactly. And, maybe we just,
They put him in a state park because possibly, in the case of Vince Foster, that put it outside the jurisdiction of DC Metro Police, and they were able to get the park rangers to do the investigation, and they had no background whatsoever in homicide investigations. That's interesting how similar that is.
Well, I actually, as a kid, I loved Smokey the Bear, but the park rangers. But
he's not. I mean, cracking homicide cases.
I mean, how many times are we going to let these coincidences happen here? And I think, this is clearly a motivation. John Glasgow's wife, I don't know whether she's moved on and doesn't care about this anymore, but it seems to me that this is a very suspicious, unresolved murder, possibly, for which there is no statute of limitations. And again, FBI, this is your province. There is an Eastern District and a Western District, I think, of I don't know how the FBI is organized in Arkansas, but we definitely know that there is a special agent in charge in Little Rock. And I'm not exactly sure where Petit Jean Mountain is in an Arkansas park, but this is something that really bears close scrutiny. So now, Fabien, 41 through 3?
Yeah, 41. Just I wanted to add 40. I mean, it's a rather grim detail, but as far as this poor Mr. John Glasgow, only his head was found. So it's quite unusual if it's not a murder.
Right.
So next point. On February 19th, 2008, so Mr. Douste Blazy, who's chairman of UNITAID, he's appointed by the UN, special advisor to the UN Secretary General, with the rank of Deputy Secretary General, which basically gives him diplomatic immunity. And later in 2008, Mr. Douste Blazy is also appointed, as I mentioned earlier, professor of medicine at the Paris-based hospital of Lariboisière. Then comes on April 2nd, 2008, a board meeting of UNITAID. There is no minute. There is only, I think, one resolution available, or few resolutions available. That meeting took place in Brasilia, Brazil, and when UNITAID meetings happen in Brasilia, Brazil, there are usually no board minutes, which is strange. There's a strange correlation.
Is that the only board meeting of UNITAID that happened outside of Switzerland?
Yes. It could be.
No, I'll tell you yes.
No, actually, not quite true. There's been Geneva, and there's also been Paris from time to time. But every year there is one in Brasilia, and every year there are no board minutes for that meeting. Now, interestingly, I noticed in one of the resolutions that, I quote, the board requests the UNITAID management to address the issues raised today. That's it. Nobody knows what these issues are. But accessing the board minutes would be interesting. A bit later, on July 2nd, 2008, the UNITAID board number 8 is convened, and the board requests, I quote, the implementation of tools to assess the ability and availability of partners to implement agreed programs. And on that particular subject, which is important, because that means, whether UNITAID has control or not over the money it sends to its partners implementing the programs, and whether it has feedback on how these programs are actually implemented, that's an essential issue. Well, guess what? The minutes of the board discussing this issue are not available. Next one, Charles?
Sure. Then, this is the famous Kumiki-Gibson memo that was released by the Podesta emails. It's never been challenged as being inauthentic. It was dated November 12th, 2008, so several days after Barack Obama's election victory. And it is a disaster for the Clinton Foundation if this is authentic. It is a disaster for the incoming Obama administration if this is authentic, because it's a memo by a trained lawyer, a skilled lawyer, laying out the results of many months of work studying the Clinton Foundation. It is a draft, but sparing you the legal niceties and the length of it and all the details. In summary, it says, you are totally screwed. I mean, we've studied this, I've studied this from the inside. You haven't complied with local laws, federal laws, the minutes are in disarray, there are lawsuits, there's a diversion of assets from an endowment, there's fake endowments, there are possibly sexual harassment lawsuits, all kinds of problems. In this memo dated November 12, 2008, which is scant days before a memorandum of understanding, as Fabien will get into it, is signed, saying everything's fine with the Clinton Foundation. The Clinton Foundation's fantastic shape. 45, Fabien?
Well, 45, that's another unnumbered board that takes place on November 12, 2008. It should be theoretically numbered number 9. There are no resolutions or minutes published. So that's another, what I call, phantom board. Charles, 46?
So the Clinton Foundation signs its tax form for 2007, but under U.S. law, you can't, and state laws, you can't submit this federal tax form without an audit for an entity this big. And there is no audit completed by this date. And as Fabien notes in this thing, there's extensive discussion of Old Chai's activities, but there's no real granular financial information concerning the consequences of the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS activities, which it'll turn out will be the largest piece by far of the combined entity, assuming the information that we've gotten so far is accurate. Then on the 16th of November 2008, 4 days past this Kamiki memo, there's a memorandum of understanding signed which says, everything is fine at the Clinton Foundation, that this is a wonderful place. It purports to lay out the ways in which conflicts are going to be managed, but it doesn't do so. It's not a legally binding agreement. We've been over this before. It is completely flawed. It is a ruse meant to give the appearance to the Senate, to the American public, that conflicts have been covered off. And my submission is there's no way this could have been done without the Obama administration's being in on this deal. There's no way that you would cobble this thing together without some sort of understanding with the incoming Obama administration. Look, we've got a problem. We'll help you pay down your campaign debts. You're going to give Hillary this position as Secretary of State. We're going to bury this problem. We're going to sweep it under the rug.
Where has B-Rock been for the past several months? Hanging out with Richard Branson, kite
Yes,
surfing?
it's time for another vacation. So let's go to the next page.
We just finished off year 2008, and we're starting 2009, which is the last year of this presentation. As far as UnitAid, on January 1st, 2009, and according to its annual report for 2008, UnitAid has received, in 2008, $349 million. That's not a small amount of money, including $226 million from France. That's 65%. And has committed $449 million to various programs, including $140 million to Old Chai, and disbursed $227 million, including $140 million to Old Chai. That will only be disclosed actually later in 2012 in the so-called 2010 and 2011 financial report, which will be audited.
So,
Charles?
yeah, actually, this should say on March 31st, 2008, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts revoked Old Chai's license to operate retroactively, actually, to October 31st, 2007. And Michael Smith had our distinguished Australian friend, who is an investigator and a detective, got an email out of Massachusetts, an official email saying the entity was dissolved for failure to file annual reports for consecutive years. That's not simply a problem for Old Chai, that's a problem for the entity that theoretically controlled Old Chai, which was the Clinton Foundation. So this is a nuclear bomb here. And in point 50, we have shown people in the past, we've gotten the full filings for the Clinton Foundation. It's still not an audit, but there are missing pages in the versions for 7, 8, and 9 that are on the Clinton Foundation website. We retrieved those portions from the New York State site, and it shows that Old Chai was a significant percentage of the revenue, but more important, Old Chai grants were almost more than 95% of all the grants disclosed, or a significant percentage of all the grants that Old Chai got, or that the Clinton Foundation got, went to Old Chai. That means the government grants mainly went to Old Chai, which means if there's a problem with Old Chai for Unitaid, there's a problem for every single donor that may have sent, government and other donor that may have sent money to Old Chai. And that is a serious, serious problem. So 51, Fabien?
Yes, just for my own clarity, on the Massachusetts decision to revoke Old Chai, is it 2008 or 2009?
8.
Sorry, so we missed that one. So just make sure, Jason, before you published the presentation, I will resend it with the small change required from this by this point.
No problem.
Okay.
Sure.
So point 51. I won't bother you with the number with the funds, the additional funds sent by Unitaid or decided by Unitaid or committed by Unitaid. But on that day, the board approves unaudited financial report for 2008. Now, we are sitting, in May 12, 2009. So that's okay. But it also approves, surprisingly, with 1 year delay, the unaudited financial report for 2006-2007. And the characteristic of these two documents are that they were never made public. I requested them by email to Unitaid. I was responded that the person in charge would respond, and it has never responded. I would love to access these two documents because they represent or they describe for sure the situation at a time where Unitaid was started, 2006. Remember, it's a sensitive time for both Chai and Unitaid, and 2007 as well. Charles, next point, 52.
Yeah, this is an important one. We talked about the states of Massachusetts, California, New York, and Michigan. In Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of Florida, I hope you're listening or your people are listening. And people in Florida, I was just down in Florida, as we mentioned in the beginning of the show, there's some powerful people in Florida who are interested in what is happening. And on June 1st, 2009, a strange entity with a similar sounding name to the Clinton Foundation, the William J. Clinton Foundation Corporation, is incorporated in Florida as a new entity. It's not registered as a foreign Arkansas corporation operating in Florida. No, it's registered as a new entity with the same employer identification number as the parent foundation, but being set up in Florida. That's a gigantic red flag for fraud. When you set up entities with similar sounding names, this could have been used as a mechanism, if it opened a bank account in Florida or elsewhere in its name, as a way to send money to this small entity that never then reaches into the parent company and becomes a catchment mechanism for stealing money. So this is something that needs to be thoroughly investigated by the FBI, the IRS, and the authorities to figure out what was really going on, why this was set up this way, were there board minutes at the Clinton Foundation on it, who were the directors of it, who authorized this, what bank accounts did they set up, what money came in and what money came out, and what did BKD, the accounting firm, know about any of all this? What did the trustees know about it? So then, let's just see. June 5th, 2009, is this the audit you're talking about, or you're talking about the 990? The 990 for 2008, Fabien, was filed later than June 5th, 2009, I think.
I think it was the dates at the time it was issued, something like that. But I rely entirely on your knowledge on this.
Okay. Yeah, I just think it might have been a different date than that, but it was filed later than that for I think it was December 31st, 2009. And if I missed that, Fabien, I'm sorry. But this one concerning 2008 purports to state that an entity called Clinton Health Access Initiative was operating in 2008, which there's no way that would have happened. It was set up on September 29th, 2009. And there's this Form 990, which should have mentioned all potential conflicts of interest, mentions none. It is incomplete. They don't have a real audit together for it. And, again, we could go on for about 16 hours just talking about 2008 and 9 if we wanted to. On September 29th, 2009, point 54, this Clinton Health Access Initiative was incorporated actually in the state of Arkansas. But having an office in Boston, and Bill Clinton and Ira Magaziner were indeed nominated, in essence, trustees for life. They were given the right to serve, Bill as chairman, Ira Magaziner as vice chairman, for life or until disability made it or death made it required for them to step down. You're not allowed to do that and pretend to be. You can't do that and say that you're going to be a public charity. So on points 55 and 56, Fabien?
Yes. Then on December 2nd, 2009, Mr. Emanueli, a French national who is member of the parliament and chairman of the finance committee of the French parliament, orders Cour des Comptes, the French independent state auditor, to investigate and report to him the sources and uses of funds of Unitaid since its inception. And on December 10th, 2010, so that's about a year later, the French Cour des Comptes issues its report to the French Parliament. This is actually also followed by public hearings at the French Parliament, and which conclusions I've already mentioned in our previous show on February 4th. So I will not get back into the details of them, but you will be able to read them on this presentation if needed. Now, roughly, what the Cour des Comptes says is, on one side, it's acknowledging that Unitaid has been quite effective in combating AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. But at the same time, it says that it has not been able to check how the funding of these drugs was actually made, where the money went, and whether these programs are actually effective. And nobody knows.
That sounds like tight controls, Fabien.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Now, there are various preliminary statements that the Cour des Comptes makes, and some of them are quite damning for WHO, because it basically says that WHO has not provided any support to Cour des Comptes, that WHO has sort of haughtily first responded to Cour des Comptes when they asked to be able to investigate Unitaid's audit Unitaid, and second, WHO has refused actually a real audit to Cour des Comptes because of the so-called principle of unicity of audit, WHO and therefore Unitaid being already audited by a UN appointed auditor, which at that time was, I think, the Controller General of India, and followed thereafter by the Controller General of the Philippines. And I'm sure that, Charles, if you were running a company, you would love to have these two auditors as your main auditors.
Well, were they General Electric's auditors?
Well, you should probably suggest General Electric to add them on their list of auditors. Yeah.
So should we go to the next page, Fabien?
So we are actually on the next page on point 56, but just to give you a rough sense again of what Cour des Comptes says, on United, it basically says that there is no internal and external controls. That's not good. It also states that there is no conflict of interest identification and resolving procedures, which is not good either. It also states that it is impossible to assess whether prescribed drugs are delivered with the contracted quality and safety specifications before their safe due date too, and complying with their transport and storage specifications. That's not very good, etc., etc. But as far as Chai is concerned, well, it basically says that, in summary, the rather extensive statement. Cour des Comptes describes old Chai in those terms. The absence, Chai is characterized by its absence of disclosure on its results, its accounts, and its means.
So Fabien, I'm not very good with words, but I'm okay with numbers. So if 0 is horrible and 100 is excellent, how would you translate this report here? Is it closer to excellent or closer to 0, or is it worse than 0?
Well, it depends whether for you 0 is excellent. No, it's actually it's pretty bad. Okay, it's let's say the only positive point is the so-called effectiveness in distributing drugs, but with the caveat that nobody knows actually how it went. And it's on the management itself of Chai and of United, it's a very bad judgment. Now, Mr. Douste-Blazy, and that's the interesting, the interest of reading these hearings is that you have a few interviews by Mr. Douste-Blazy and also by some of the Cour des Comptes people who did the job of investigating its accounts. And Mr. Douste-Blazy finally recognizes the need to step up controls. Now, we are when these hearings happens, it's, I think, second part of 2011. It's, 4 years after the starting of the company. I've seen in some of the board minutes available that there has been some discussion about transparency, about control. So it's not a new issue. But, until that point, it has never been seriously addressed. And that's, when talking about the amount of money that have been channeled through United until 2010, which again is $297 million, that's unacceptable, I think.
So,
my personal opinion.
So Fabien, just to ask a few questions. In 2007, Sarkozy was elected, right? And he was,
yes.
Was he re-elected in 2012?
No, he was beaten by Mr. Holland.
All right, but he ran, right?
But he ran, absolutely.
So he needed money, right, to run?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And in 2011, was anything going on in Libya?
There were a few problems in Libya, yes. There was even a war started, I think.
Yeah. And
with the help of Mrs. Clinton pressuring a good old friend, Mr. Sarkozy, to actually do it also.
Right, and so
if I recall well.
Yeah, and in 2012, did Barack Obama run for re-election?
That would be a fair assumption.
Yeah, and so perhaps in 2011 he may have assumed that he needed to raise money to finance that election?
That is not inconceivable.
So to have a large entity backed by France working with a failed presidential candidate who would go on to be a two-time loser, Hillary Clinton and the Clinton people, might it suit interests in France, Sarkozy interests in France, and Clinton-Obama interests in the United States to continue to allow this fraud to operate in the way it was operating, because sums leaking out of it could be used primarily for political purposes, but maybe even for personal purposes. And if that's the case, you know, who can investigate this?
I agree.
The answer is you. But
I have no subpoena powers.
As yet.
The FBI has. I don't.
So should we jump to number 57?
Yes. Well, that's another board with without and with its board when it's not being made available. So let's move to 58, which is a key point you have discovered when you were digging all the numbers around chai. Please, Charles.
Okay. On December 31st, 2009, this entity, Clinton Health Access Initiative, we call it now New Chai, filed an application for federal tax exemption, which is a tough form that has to be filed under penalties of perjury. So you cannot lie, you can't make a material misstatement, you can't omit material facts. And on this filing, we've talked about this before, the trustees of this New Chai say that New Chai is not a successor organization to any predecessor activity. These financial statements, we've shown you this before, emerge out of portions of the, in quotes, audits for 2007, 8, and 9 that are omitted from the Clinton Foundation filings on their website, but available in New York State and other states. And they show that in 2007, 8, and 9, 99% of the grants that are disclosed to the Clinton Foundation go to Old Chai. 99%. So, you know, I could see if it were 0.9%, you'd say, well, maybe there's no predecessor activity. But if 99%, 98.98% of the grants that are made by any government or large foundation towards the Clinton Foundation go to this Old Chai, that defines materiality. 67% on average, the extreme right column here, 67% of the expenses of the Clinton Foundation are Old Chai, 2/3 of the expenses. 64% of the ending share of cash on the balance sheet is Old Chai. Pharmaceutical expenses are $213 million. Now, Unitate grants to Old Chai are $297 million, greater than the 213 million spent on pharmaceuticals. So, you know,
they didn't include Roger Clinton in that number.
Roger Clinton and Jennifer Flowers. I mean, that's right. But Fabien made an important point, many important points, but one of them was that Unitate's grants were supposed to go primarily to program expenses, to buying pharmaceuticals. So Unitate gave $297 million to Old Chai to, in theory, purchase pharmaceuticals, but in total, Old Chai only spent $213 million on pharmaceuticals, and Old Chai received money from Australia, from the Gates Foundation, from the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, from Norway, from many other places. What happened to Unitate's money? And why didn't the Unitate people care? Why do they still not care? What happened to it? So if we could just make it a little bit smaller. Yeah, this is the point I was making before, that the audit report for 2008 is issued on December 31st, 2009. And, you know, again, it's riddled with all kinds of errors. On point 60, this Clinton Health Access Initiative, we call it New Chai, and basically they've never accounted for the period September 29th, 2009 to December 31st, 2009, when both old chai and new chai simultaneously existed. They've never done the kind of granular analysis of saying our grants came into the Clinton Foundation, so many were routed towards old chai, so many were routed towards new chai, and of those amounts, how much were routed by country, by type of program, pediatric AIDS, second-line AIDS, first-line AIDS, local currency, exchange rate, none of the granularity that is required, strictly speaking, under generally accepted accounting principles in the United States. None of that was done at a time when, in this period 7, 8, and 9, currency exchange rates are violently shifting. There's a financial crash, the run-up to the financial crash, the aftermath of the financial crash, and the credit market crash. Some countries, particularly developing countries, saw the values of their currencies plummet. In the case of Zimbabwe, went down by almost 99%. So there's tremendous, in this kind of volatile, uncontrolled, no controlled environment, there's tremendous potential for literally hundreds of millions of dollars to go missing. And nobody seems to care about it. So if we go to the next page.
So getting to the conclusions, yeah, 61, Charles, yeah.
Just to see, 1 second. Yeah, so none of these entities, the old Clinton Foundation, the new Clinton Foundation, the old chai, the new chai, none of them have ever been validly organized in compliance with U.S., federal, state, foreign laws, or operated lawfully anywhere in the world. We still have no granular details concerning which foreign governments gave what sums for what purposes from 2001 right the way through 2009. No information. We don't yet. Old Chai has given in the 990s. We do have a list of donors. Excuse me, but we don't know whether the list they provided is the full list. For example, in 4 and 5, or in 5, we definitely know that there were substantial donations, and then in 6, 7, 8, and 9 from foreign governments, but there's no way of testing any of this, cross-checking any of this, and it's very clear that the auditors and the boards of the Clinton Foundation and of Old Chai have operated these entities with reckless disregard for the law. Fabien, 64.
Right. Well, in terms of Unitaid, as we've mentioned already, the board has approved unaudited accounts for 2006-2007 as one period, and then 2008 separately, with 2006-2007 being approved a year and a half later, which is a year late. These accounts have not been made public. That's not normal. And then, as we will see in the next presentation later in the month, the 2007 and 8 accounts and 2009 and 2010 will be issued as a BNL accounts for 2 years, audited, but only available starting 2011. So Unitaid will start to have normal audited approved accounts for its first 3 years only in 2011. And that's not normal either. Looking at the overall picture for this whole period, basically Unitaid has raised 66% of its resources from France and allocated 41% of its grants to Old Chai, including half of its grants in 2006-2007. And you have, in this page, for those interested in numbers, the details year by year for this, for Unitaid's sources of funds as well as use of funds, and kind of reconciliation using 3 sources of Unitaid data produced by Unitaid, and trying to figure out whether they actually reconcile or not, and they do not quite reconcile. And as Charles knows perfectly well, and I know also as well, is that, when it comes to accounting, the devil is in the detail. If the books do not quite match, then even if it's a few dollars missing, that's not good news.
No.
Yeah. So that needs to be checked.
So actually, Fabien, another thing that needs to be checked here that's quite interesting, and it's tough perhaps for our readers to see it. In 2006 and 7, really for 2 months in 6 and 12 months in 7, of the uses of funds, 49.7% of the monies dispersed went to Old Chai. In 2008, 61.7% went to Old Chai. These are the 2 years in which Hillary Clinton was running for president. In 2009, it dropped suddenly to 24.2%. It's a big change in 2009. There has to be a reason for that change. There have to be emails and records. Somebody raised the alarm and said, "Now wait a minute, why are we sending all this money to Old Chai?" And that culminated in the decision by December 2nd, Mr. Emanuele, to demand the inquiry of the Cour des Comptes. There has to be a record here. This didn't happen by accident. And this is precisely, Fabien, in this time frame in FBI, this is precisely in the early period of 2009, we still have no information about email traffic in January, February, March, and April 2009. There's precious little information concerning email traffic that likely did occur in size, involving Hillary Clinton, involving Secretary of State, involving the Clinton Foundation, involving the government of France. There's no information about this, and this is precisely when they were putting Hillary Clinton on the secret server regime. So this is very telling information, actually.
And if I may add one point, I think I recall that in one of the board minutes, the Brazilian representative is raising a big question on what he thinks Old Chai being overly represented as a use of funds. In other terms, Old Chai gets too much money.
Well, and that's one, we need to do a special show on Brazil for many reasons. I know Jason has fond memories in Brazil. Fabien spent a year of his life, after more than a year, wasn't it, in Brazil?
About a year and a half, and I also worked as investment banker in Brazil.
And my grandmother was Brazilian. So for many reasons, we need to reach out and figure out, one of my grandmothers was Brazilian. So we need to figure out, we need to do a show on Brazil and reach out to the Brazilians and find out what happened.
Well, I think perhaps we should go to Brazil, Charles.
That's not a bad...
That's a good idea. That's a great... I still have quite a few friends there, so it'll be a lovely trip. Let's move to point 66 because we are running out of time for me.
Which is point 66?
So point 66, that's a Charles point, sorry.
Next page. There you are. I think we've really covered this in great depth, but
okay.
Yeah, I mean, just the summary point is that a simpleton, somebody who in our system in the United States decided in 8th grade that he or she wanted to be a lawyer and thought about this, would be able to see very quickly that this is a complete fraud, that there's no evidence that the Clinton entities were ever actually lawfully organized or operated anywhere in the world, and yet there's abundant evidence that a sophisticated government, a large government, France, and many other governments sent hundreds of millions of dollars toward it. So, this is a case study in sloppiness, potentially much worse, fraud, corruption, public corruption, money laundering, and who's going to investigate this? So, Fabien, 67?
Yeah, no, 67 is just to remind viewers who've seen the previous February 4th show that, but also for those who haven't, that the annual reports of Unitaid over that period, 2006 to 2009 included, you've actually 7 different terms to describe old chai. And I have listed them here. And there's a reference to the actual report and the page number. So it's, I think, quite precise. So you can see that there's a lot of imagination going on at UNITAID and a lot of variation in the theme around Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative. So sometimes it's Clinton Foundation, sometimes it's a combination of Clinton Foundation and HIV/AIDS initiative, and sometimes it's another set of words. I wonder why is there so much mental confusion on how to describe old chai in these reports, which are annual reports, official reports, therefore, but which have not been approved by the board, which is strange. And if we continue on the next point, this is an analysis of what I would call board secretarial diligence. That's obviously below par. I have identified about 13 board actually taking place one way or the other. Well, 7 board minutes are missing out of 13, which is not an insubstantial percentage. 5 board documents are actually not numbered. 2 board minutes pretend to have the same number, which is a problem. And if you look on the right of that presentation, you will see that it's actually detailed. So anyone reading that presentation can go back to UNITAID's website and identify immediately what I'm talking about. And that would take 5 minutes. It took me a week to get that done. But anyone using exactly the method I'm suggesting would take a few minutes to double check that. And that's assuming UNITAID doesn't change its website after this presentation is actually published. That's why I've done screenshots, which sits at the end of this presentation.
Good.
Now, so there are quite a lot of, I would say, dysfunctionalities in what we call board secretarial diligence, bearing in mind that any chairman is responsible for the way the board is conducted, and having minutes properly redacted or properly actually written and properly then booked into the minute book is essential. Going to next page. Jason, please. Now, the conclusion on the next set of conclusion is that, if anyone was running a for-profit corporation the way we have described for Chai, and even for UNITAID, that would guarantee jail for everyone.
It's too bad that's not happening in this case.
Yeah, me so. That reminds me that actually one of your shows, gentlemen, was I've Got Jail.
Yes, you've got jail.
Right. I just want to make sure that everybody understood the point here is that when you mismanage systematically, and that can be construed as a conspiracy to hide, for example, how money is used and even how money is diverted, that has, all the elements that we have described can be construed as basically representing such a scheme.
So Fabien, I know you have a hard deadline coming up, and I'm not sure if it's in 5 minutes or 20 minutes, but
I can do 20 minutes, 15 minutes.
So I think we've really covered most of these points, but what we haven't covered is the current status of where is I don't know if you're yet able to comment on this, but is it possible that the French government will be studying any of this and will be maybe reaching out to the US government, reaching out to other governments, and reaching out to the Trump administration and saying, what happened? You know, and you know, how could you operate this way? I mean, is it possible that the French are actually going to get upset about this?
Well, you know, it's a difficult question because it's a chicken and egg situation. Legally, the bulk of the fraud has been done in the U.S. because it has been initiated by U.S. legal entities using dollar payments mostly, and the French, or if it's the French or any other government, cannot really move until the Americans on their side have proven one way or the other that there is a serious fraud going on. Okay, and that's the job of the FBI. And remember also that UNITAID is currently a UN entity. And I'm not sure the French have the power in the same way the Americans have to actually go after UN personnel in a case which the Hudson Institute was actually describing, whereby the activities are actually not non-profit, but are actually for-profit. So that's one problem for the French. And the second problem for the French is that since this is penal or criminal, they can only go after crimes that have been committed on French territory. That's an absolute principle on the French penal law. Now, there are ways to attach events that happened outside of France, but that are connected to France one way or the other. And there's a very strict jurisprudence by the French Cour de Cassation, which is the French top Supreme Court, basically, on this. So, you know, even if you want to go after, even if French prosecutor wants to go after UNITAID and the Clinton Foundation, they don't have the same freedom or the same flexibility that the Americans have. But at the same time, they can accompany and even help any American investigation. Now, you should know that I had a few comments, and I will come back to that, what happened actually. But I had a few comments from French police on the difficulty of cooperating with the FBI. That's recent. Okay? So there's a problem at the FBI with cooperating with foreign police forces. And that needs a political will to ensure that this happens on both sides, actually.
Well, it's interesting. I just would like to, I know I'm watching the clock, so I'm mindful that I won't take up too much of your time. I was shocked when the Tsarnaev incident happened. We learned that the Russians came to our FBI and said, hey, we know these Tsarnaev people, and you know they're going to cause serious trouble for you, and you ought to do something about them. And when the Russian government came forward, the FBI brushed the Russians aside and were difficult to operate with the Russians. Now you're saying the French may have had experience where our FBI was difficult with the French. It would stand to reason that if there was corruption in the FBI, the last thing the corrupt members of the FBI would want is, in quotes, help from foreign powers as powerful as the French, as powerful as the Russian, who could maybe see these same problems. And this is just underscores the degree to which Donald Trump and his new head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, and Mr. Sessions, or whoever the team is going to be, they have to appreciate that the rot likely runs really deep here. And they have to get off a dime. You know, it's okay to take a year finding your feet, but this is now the second year of the administration. We're running out of excuses to explain why this mammoth fraud, you know, involving discredited people in the Democratic Party who may continue to hang around the Democratic Party and may want to, damage the Democratic Party further. It's in the interests of the entire political spectrum to expose this inside the country, and I think it's in the interest of France. And isn't it the case that Emmanuel Macron is due for a visit next month to the White House with Mr. Trump?
I think the FBI was probably worried that the Russians were colluding with Putin.
But anyway, so Fabien, what might happen if the FBI got serious, the Trump administration got serious, and the FBI and the Trump administration asked the French for help?
I think they would provide it. Well, now probably I have to state publicly what I have done so far on this front. Early September, I sent a letter to the French National Financial Prosecutor. Now, this lady, in fact, but this function does not exist in the US. The closest equivalent would be like a sort of deputy attorney general in charge of serious federal and state fraud. These frauds being also either complex or international. This special sort of prosecutor, I don't want to call it special prosecutor because in the US it has another sense. But this prosecutor, called the financial prosecutor, was created by Mr. Hollande in 2011, so it's a new body. And in France it has competence or jurisdiction over any complex or international fraud involving France. And it has probably about 15 or 20 junior prosecutors working in this particular group. And, they are actually overworked. There's just too many complex and international frauds passing through their office. Yeah. Now, I did send the lady heading this group a letter, which was actually a 4-page memo, which, Charles, you've seen, because it was in French but also in English, which basically said 2 key ideas. Number one, Clinton Foundation could be construed as a major charity fraud, probably the largest in US history. Number two, this is not only an American problem, but it's also a French problem because France has funded at least half of it. And it's by far the largest donor or supply of resources to United and therefore the Clinton Foundation. On September 6th last year, I was auditioned by French police. And I had 2 subjects. I won't raise the other subject. But on this subject, I was also questioned for about 25 minutes. I don't know since that day what happened at the French National Prosecutor's Office. What I do know is that I have channeled on their indirect request a bunch of information which, Charles, basically is your information. I mean, key shows, key presentations, or key extracts of presentations. And I've also channeled them the work I've done over the past 3 weeks, which is this 90-page timeline, which interweaves not only Old Chai, New Chai, Clinton Foundation, and United, but also all the entire political saga which has happened over the past 20 years, and promotions in respect of Mr. Müller, for example, Mr. Comey, Mr. Rosenstein, some of the so-called presumed pay-to-play games, such as Mr. Justra, for example, or Uranium One. So the entire picture has been put together in this memo, which is in French, and which the French National Prosecutor has. And Charles, you have it too. So basically, at this point, the French National Prosecutor has a lot of information, and I'm sure they will have today's presentation shortly. Okay? What are they doing? I don't know. And probably I will not know. It's as if I was asking you the question of what is the FBI doing today, and especially if it's under working under an empaneled grand jury.
I think they're texting their girlfriends, aren't they?
Do not know. So if I don't know, it doesn't mean that they're doing something, but it doesn't mean that they're not doing something. I just don't know. So I think I responded to your question, Charles.
You have indeed. Well, thank you very much, Fabien. I don't know if the balance of the presentation is what we need to cover, or if we are done.
I think no. We have just on the balance of the presentation, but the remaining presentation basically I have 5 questions which needs to be addressed. I want to know what happened at WHO, which is the legal entity administering Unitaid. Yeah. They have, under the UN Charter, the responsibility to administer Unitaid. That's the first question for me. Second question is, was there any due diligence on Clinton Foundation in its various under its various name changes, on Old Chai, and due diligence by Unitaid, but also by WHO? And in these organizations, who did the due diligence? And what was the result of that due diligence, if any? Third question I have is, what kind of representations were given by Mr. Bill Clinton, by the Clinton Foundation, and by Old Chai to Unitaid, and even to Cour des Comptes? Because if Cour des Comptes missed what Charles has brilliantly identified, where they're actually misguided, why didn't they do this simple check, which is normally a check they would probably do if it was a French company? They would certainly do it. They would first check whether the company is actually its activity is actually within the guidelines provided by its bylaws, and namely its purpose. Why haven't they checked that? I don't know. Is it because it should have been checked by WHO or by Unitaid or by both? That's a key question. And I'm not blaming Cour des Comptes for that, because, as stated in my presentation, the full audit of Unitaid is not their job, and the problem is that the UN audit system is insufficient. Now, the last, the next series of questions before the last is, would be, where did the money disbursed by Unitaid go? When I mean money disbursed by Unitaid, it's money disbursed by Unitaid to Old Chai and Clinton Foundation. Where did it actually go?
This is something the questions have been asking throughout the show today.
Yeah, but I just want to insist because for anybody looking into that, tracing the money is the first thing that needs to be done. Yeah, and I'm not sure tracing the money has been done so far. And I want to understand which bank accounts, as well, of these entities, and thereafter where the money went. And same question for the Clinton Foundation entity in the UK. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabien.
Thank you.
Any questions, Charles, on this?
No, I know you have to rush.
Yeah, I'm okay. Just about.
We will spend a few minutes wrapping up, and we'll make sure that the French presentation we'll wait for your final version before we post it, but we'll post the short few slides that we're going to go through today that I began with and that I'll close with after you're gone. But really, thank you very much, Fabien. If you need to
You're
rush.
welcome. Okay, I'm going, and Jason, so I'll send you within the next 2 or 3 hours the revised PDF presentation. Is that okay?
Forward. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabien.
Thank you,
Gentlemen, thanks a lot,
Oh.
and have a good continuation today.
Have
on
a
this one.
lovely day
Well,
there in Japan.
tonight, because, yeah. Take care.
Take
Bye.
care.
Sayonara.
Sayonara,
Thanks.
exactly.
Sayonara, yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Au revoir. All right.
So we'll go quickly through this because I don't want this to be the longest ever Sunday with Charles.
It's up there.
It's getting close. All right. In the coming weeks really, it would seem that France, Australia, the UK, many foreign governments, I think, are waking up, have been studying this, have been waiting for the Clinton Foundation to be actually investigated, and for sums that have been routed towards that fraud to be recouped in some way. And we're seeing rumblings in the press, we're seeing multiple accounts, we're seeing the good work of many people around the world is coming finally together. In addition, what we're beginning to see is that the public, instead of giving up on this and say, this stuff happens all the time, the public is beginning to say, nah, we really want to know what happened here.
Hashtag lock her up.
Yeah, and it's convenient that Hillary, I think, is flying now to India, where the prisons are not very good.
Wasn't she going to go to New Zealand or something?
Next month. In May, she's going to, but I think she was in Hawaii, strangely traveling with Bill, and then going over to India. And I will say, not in this presentation, but I have studied Indian laws relating to charity fraud and deceptive practices. On the books are quite strict. That's a whole area for another discussion. But not only are people interested in the charity fraud angles, but Jason, if you look at this one here, I'd just like to pull that link up if that's possible.
Yep.
There's, especially in the United Kingdom, there is now, I don't know what's going on there. There we go. There's more and more focus now on the UN, Oxfam, a UK charity, and this Clinton Foundation may be involved, and maybe not, I hope the trustees of these organizations were not involved, but it's possible that in these disrupted areas of the world where there's all kinds of problems, that child sex trafficking may have been going on.
I mean, we've known about this for quite a while. Laura Silsby and Bill Clinton getting involved with getting her out with these, I think it was 33 kids that she took out of Haiti.
Right. But this is interesting because there's a whistleblower who's gone on the record. This is new news to me. I didn't know there was a whistleblower, and I think this is lifted, if from memory, from a reputable.
This is according to former UN chief.
But I think, where is this from? I think it originally came from the Sunday Times of London. I could be wrong on that.
Your Newswire.
But this is a report lifted from another, according to the Daily Mail.
Daily Mail. Oh, well, our buddy, who was the ambassador, Craig Murray, doesn't trust the Daily Mail. He thinks it's fake news.
I know Alana Goodman, who's a great reporter there, American.
Well, and also, I just think this is something that we've known about for a while. The thing with Laura Silsby speaks directly to this. It's the Clinton Foundation. It's, the UN is very active in Haiti. Oxfam is very active in Haiti.
Well, it's time to really get to the bottom of it. So if we go back into the presentation.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen here is I did a television interview right before we started on this, believe it or not, that there's going to be increased attention. We don't need to pull this link up, the third link, on exactly how much surveillance illegal surveillance on U.S. citizens was being undertaken under the Obama administration, starting by 2009-10 timeframe, not simply on James Rosen and his family, which is bad enough, but on members of the House, the Senate, perceived enemies of the administration, wherever they may be, for the benefit of donors to the Obama administration, the Democratic Party. This is a big area that needs to be given tremendous attention. I wrote this in the morning with access to the internet, but not with access to television, and I didn't know that Pocahontas had abdicated her presidential campaign on the Chris Wallace Fox News Sunday show. But apparently she has, and I made this prediction, which quickly came true.
I should have had the hat ready.
Maybe
Great
next time.
Fortell.
Yeah. But
your genie hat.
oh, I know, but also that's right. That's one type of Indian, but my other. But the other point I would make is there's a lot of noise being shouted around that Kamala Harris is going to be a leading presidential candidate. She has said here, and again, we don't need to pull this link up, she said that she's 100% behind the notion that it was wrong, that it was absolutely okay for the Oakland mayor to defy Sessions and the federal government on this question of chasing down illegal criminal immigrants to the United States of America. It has nothing to do with ethnicity, it has nothing to do with racism, it has nothing to do with bias, it has everything to do with a common sense solution that the role of government is to protect the citizens of this country, not anybody who happens to come here. If the interests of the citizens diverge from the interests of the illegal criminal immigrants who are here, maybe contributing, maybe not, I think your obvious first duty is to protect the citizens. If you then, in the kindness of your heart, can maybe let some deserving cases, children who came across with their parents when they were minors, that kind of stuff. But to be lenient on hardened criminals who've been in this country and deported multiple times strikes me as a sure way to destroy a political party's viability. And so Kamala Harris ought to consider, as she thinks about her candidacy, maybe visiting a few places outside California, Washington, D.C., and New York, and see what the rest of the country, where all the voters and electoral college votes actually are, what they care about, because it might help her campaign.
Charles, somebody was telling me a story about how their car got crashed into by somebody who was an illegal immigrant who didn't have a license or insurance. And it's not the biggest crime in the world, and the person having the auto accident might have been an honest, well-meaning person, but they left my friend in a financial situation that put him in a hard spot because there was no insurance, nobody to go after.
Right.
And it was like, okay, a couple $1,000 now.
Yeah, maybe what you do is you put the representatives in the House and the Senate on the hook for it, personally.
I mean, I'm just saying, even if someone isn't here specifically to murder and do real serious crimes, if you're going to immigrate illegally, that is a crime.
Well, I just know the few times, I unfortunately went to Saudi Arabia 3 times, I think maybe 4 times. And this is back in the 90s. And in that time frame, I don't know if it's still the case, if you're an American, anybody, but particularly an American, and you want to visit Saudi Arabia, you needed to get a financial guarantor for your trip. In other words...
Oh, in case you did any damage while you were there?
Right, and you had to get somebody to vouch for you, and you had to fill out these visas and do all this kind of stuff to go to our ally Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
That would be, a province of Iran if we didn't back them up militarily. So, I mean, you want to look at strict immigration rules. There are some strict immigration rules. There's just a few quick points.
We're going to go back to it. I just changed the shot here. I don't know that I would take too many pages out of the book of Saudi Arabia, but it's a point well taken.
Yeah. So there's a big question here. Who is going to take responsibility, financial and criminal responsibility, for the massive penalties that are going to flow here once the federal and state governments in this country start going, who's gonna own the blame and take the penalties? This link here is an interesting link.
Eskimo.com?
Yeah.
Is that also an Elizabeth Warren publication?
Yeah, that's her next trick. She's going to move to Canada and try to get some of that territory. This is a very interesting memo I noticed in the last several weeks. It's another 33-page memo, but it gives you a sense.
Is it 33 pages?
I think so. If you look at the bottom, I think it says 33.
We'll check it. Sorry, I didn't mean to throw off your flow there.
Oh, I could have it wrong. Maybe it's not 33. It is 33.
I don't know. Who wrote this memo,
It's
Charles?
a bunch of Eskimos. But anyway, this gives you a sense of, the body of, it's not meant to be an exhaustive summary, but it gives you a sense of the hoops you have to jump through in order to register a charity like the Clinton Foundation and its affiliates lawfully and operate it lawfully. And the question before the jury, or not yet before the jury, is who's going to take responsibility for this long-standing, more than 20-year pattern and practice of operating the largest set of unprosecuted frauds in history? Who's going to take the blame? Is it going to be, are the Clintons going to try to pin it on Andrew Kessel, the CFO, or pin it on Eric Braverman? Or is it past time for people who, will be the likely targets for the Clintons to stand up, go up the food chain, and implicate the Bruce Lindsays, the Iron Magaziners, the Bill Clintons, the George Soroses, the big donors? I mean, this is a big mess, and it is a shame. It's a pox on the good name of the charitable sector in this country and around the world, and we cannot bury this problem. We have to fully expose it and then pin the blame and send the people responsible to prison after they pay whatever fines are appropriately meted out here. So if we go back into
Charles, who was Bill's Dan Lasseter? That guy Dan Lasseter. Somebody sent me a video where it was like the Senate whatever committee interviewing Dan Lasseter. He's like the dumbest guy ever, and like total coke dealer, like pimp. It was crazy, and he's friends with Bill Clinton.
So we don't need to hit this second to last link, but I can report that I had several conversations, I've reported this before, with senior people around the Obama Presidential Foundation who expressed sincere interest in trying to actually bring the Obama Foundation into compliance. But since those conversations, what we're seeing in Chicago is rising resistance to the way in which the Obama Presidential Foundation wants to organize itself, wants to operate.
Who's resisting that?
The local Chicago community activists don't like what they see because it's an eyesore and it's messing up a park and there are all kinds of problems with it. And I would just caution Team Obama, for what it's worth, that based on what I know about the state of the Clinton Foundation, defects in their filings, and what I know about the interest level that governments in the world, around and around the country have in this mess, I think it would behoove oneself to tread very carefully and refrain from going anywhere near the path that the Clintons traveled from October 23rd, 1997 forward. And I'd like to see some signs, which will be publicly available for the Obama Foundation soon, that they are complying. Because if I don't see anything, and I get the impression that the Obama Foundation was taking advantage of my sincere interest in trying to help them, then having put them on fair warning, I would just say, I am not happy with presidential foundations like the Clinton Foundations that go the wrong way, and I will be extremely unhappy if a foundation like the Obama Foundation, having been put on notice, tries to emulate this Clinton Foundation. So fair warning to them.
Well, when you told me you were going to that meeting, I felt very certain that they were feeling you out. They're like, hey, what do you think of this fraud?
No, it wasn't at all like that. Honestly, it wasn't like that. So the other thing I would say is that, and we can close with this, we should hit this link if you can, Jason, this Zero Hedge article. We are in now the final stages of a true reset, not an overcharge, as the reset button said in Russian, but a true, what? This happens so many times.
Maybe we can just find it on zero hedge.
What the F is that thing? I was going to put that up.
What is going on with zero hedge here? What is that?
Just hit the X and it'll close. It's an ad.
Okay.
Keep going down. No.
A lot of
A
ads.
lot of ads. You got to pay the rent.
Yeah. Yes, Ryan Bundy running for Nevada governor.
Good.
I meant to call him.
Let's see.
Well,
Wait, stop. This one is, I hadn't seen it because it just came out at 5:51. Is a dollar funding crime? And this is a technical thing, but if this chart is correct that's on the right, yeah, there is a dollar funding crisis in play.
what does that mean?
It means that the rate paid to borrow dollars overnight is spiking upwards.
So many ads today.
Yeah, so if we go back into the table of contents for a sec, no, in what you just had there. Yeah, and then back one page, one arrow.
Why are we suddenly getting ads here? I normally have an ad blocker on.
Yeah.
Something
So
crazy.
here, we could just, you don't have to click on the story, but here, look, the $233 trillion dark cloud of global debt. I mean, the total output of the global economy is about $75 trillion. If we have $233 trillion of debt on an economy that only produces $75 trillion of economic output, of which, call it a third of that's government spending, or 25 to 30% government spending, that is a massive problem. And I think we're starting to see signs now that the financial markets are unwinding, meaning interest rates are going up, stock prices could start going down. This is a moment of great, drama, and I would close this presentation. We've talked a lot about charity fraud, but I really am trying to sound the alarm to people who are thinking about what to do in 2018. This is not a year to increase your debt. This is a year, personally, to decrease your debt if you can responsibly. It is not a year to take crazy risks without considering their consequences should things go the wrong way. This is a moment, I have not witnessed a more dangerous moment in my lifetime, even considering the 2007, 8, 9 period.
Wow.
So I'd be very, very cautious. And with that, happy springtime.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, clocks went back or forward an hour. This was something that came up during the conversation. This is John Glasgow, who Fabien mentioned, who committed suicide by decapitating himself or whatever, which I don't really know how that's possible. And then also, while we've been broadcasting here, Charles, there's been a helicopter crash here in New York City, at least 2 killed, and people in the chat were reporting some video showed what looked like a fairly controlled landing, but what people may not know is that when a helicopter's engine or transmission or runs out of fuel, when it's disabled, it can do something called auto-rotation, where the dropping of the helicopter actually causes the rotors to spin in such a way that it slows the descent. But
Doesn't help you.
I mean, you can survive a helicopter crash, but you probably prefer to avoid them. They're very dangerous. So hopefully the remaining 4 on the helicopter will make it out of the East River there alive. Well, Charles, that was an epic marathon of Sunday with Charles. Crowdsource the Truth, of course. It's a community-sponsored news resource, and we definitely want people to sponsor the show. I'm going to try to shorten the sponsorship announcement. Will we be doing a closing in episode on Wednesday?
If you're around.
I am around, and I think we should be closing in until the doors of San Quentin close on Mrs. Clinton's pinky toe.
Very good. Well, thanks for your time, and thanks to the viewers for watching this special edition, and thanks to Fabien for all his work. He obviously put a tremendous amount of work into this.
Yes. Thanks very much, Fabien. We'll be back tomorrow night at 7 p.m. with America's first refugee, Harmon Wilfred, and his wife, Carolyn. Everyone's eagerly waiting to hear about the outcome of Carolyn's investor. Her brothers were, what were they doing? Investor discrimination hearing.
Good.
So curious to hear what happens there. All right. Thank you, Charles. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll see you tomorrow.